Hello folks, I never know whether to start talking when I hit the start streaming button or whether I should wait for the return stream from wherever the server might be to see that I'm actually on the stream. But it seems that we've been on for 26 seconds and my stream should be coming up on the return stream shortly. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, ham radio station 20 kilometres due east of the city of Melbourne in Australia, putting out a call to everybody who might be interested in the history, particularly of radio. History tonight. So what do we have scheduled? Well, I think it could be safely said that advertisements, if they advertise a product that's defunct, are no longer advertisements. So I'll be interspersing the serious historical items with bits and pieces of old adverts. Anyway, it's 9:30 p.m, time to go on 147.475 megs, as usual. Hello, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima from Burwood East in Melbourne. Commencing live stream on YouTube, as well as a test transmission on 147.475, a regular thing that we do each week, a tradition established by my predecessor with my call sign Tony Sanderson, the late Tony Sanderson, VK3AML, back in the early 70s, and continued ably by Dave Stewart through the 70s, 80s, 90s and into the 2000s. Dave Stewart, VK3 Alpha Sierra Echo, who probably will be listening as well. My levels are a bit high, so I just have to adjust those. And please remember there's only one person operating here, so doing all the levels, the video, the audio, it all becomes a little bit overwhelming at times. So if I don't answer people's calls on the text stream immediately, please understand. I see VK3ZB is with us. G'day there. I think it's Michael. VK3 Zulu Bravo. So first of all, repeating what I said on the live stream before coming live, and if you want to look at the video component of this transmission, please Google VK3AML 30 April 2022, or look for the live stream on my YouTube channel, which is under the name Oz Radio Historian, one word, AUSRADIOHISTORIAN, Oz Radio Historian in one word. The time at 9:32, and with 4 people now watching, g'day. We'll have a word from somebody quite well known who demised about 10 years ago, much to our regret. 10 years? Gosh, it's 26 years now that he's been gone. Poor fellow. But I note occasionally people pop up on 2 meters without giving call signs or identification, and there are people on the live stream who identify themselves as Pirate. So allow me to introduce first of all Frank.
Hello. I wonder if you'd mind having a look right now to see if you have a current radio and TV license, Oh, don't worry, you go ahead. I'll keep an eye on the telly. I'll let you know if anything happens while you're away. Oh, you're back. Any luck? Oh, that's good. So comforting, because there could be a knock at your door at any time. And if you didn't happen to have a current radio and TV license, you could be up for a very heavy fine. So embarrassing. Anyway, now you can get back to your televiewing with a clear conscience. Or can you? Hmm?
Or can you? And I'd aim that at the many pirates we've heard on ham radio through the years. This is VK3AML with the regular Saturday night test transmission, concurrent live stream on VK3AML 30 April 2022 on YouTube live streaming. Well, it's been an interesting week in terms of historical material turning up, and one of the earliest films on aspects of radio manufacturing that has survived to the present time was made in New York, actually on Long Island in 1925, and its coverage of Alfred Grieb's radio factory and the manufacture of his, I suppose you'd call it, masterpiece design TRF set, the Grebe Synchrophase. It would appear also that Alfred Grieb, being quite a pioneer of radio, was also, it appears, a pioneer of home movie making, because Kodak had only released the 16mm home movie gauge and suitable cameras for it in 1923. And Alfred Grieb managed to get an advertising film made of his factory, tracing the complete operation of that factory from bits of brass through to finished radio product in 1925, less than 18 months after the release of the equipment to make the film. Somehow the film made its way onto the Prelinger archives on internet, the old internet archives that almost preceded the internet itself. Very few people actually use the internet archives these days. It's a pity, because there's a lot of interesting stuff there. However, let's have a look at the early radio work of Alfred Grieb. Alfred H. Grieb, born 1895 and died at the age of only 40 in 1935. Actually, his name should be pronounced Grebe, according to most of the American references. He was a radio pioneer, licensed as a radio ham in 1910, so he was a real first-generation pioneer, licensed from the age of 15. From 1914, at the age of 19, he was a radio manufacturer, making all of the parts for his radios in his own factory at Richmond Hill, New York. Now, moving on with the initial slideshow before we show the film. This is Alfred Grieb, taken towards the end of his life in the early 1930s. Perhaps the first time he came to attention of the radio press was when he had a full radio telephone in his car, probably on the broadcast band as it now stands, and this is Alfred in 1919 with that first car mobile rig. I suspect that this was the first radio telephone ever installed in a car. Not very compact, however, and the inverted L antenna was a telltale to how low the frequencies he was operating on. However, by this stage he was building his own equipment. In 1922 he built this factory in Richmond Hill, New York, in the borough of Queens, and it had its own broadcast station attached to it to give people who bought the Grieb product something to receive. This is the factory as it still stands today. It's been architecturally modified, but it's now a part of the Jamaica Hospital Medical Centre on Jamaica Avenue near Van Nuys in Richmond Hill, Long Island, east side of Manhattan, New York. And still very much as it was. This is how it was in 1925 coming up. There's a plaque on the front to commemorate the function of the building, still there. But this is the way it was in 1925 with the big radio transmitting masts on top. And all of that was devoted to making radio parts and complete receivers. The studios for their station up on the top floor were quite well presented. They had an organ, gramophone and grand piano, and broadcast quite a few notable people through that period. This is their first announcer, the 16-year-old Nancy Clancy. I wonder if that was her real name. They also had Major Andrew Wright on the left interviewing Al Smith, the presidential candidate in 1925. Another thing that Alfred Grieb did was to set up VHF location transmitters that could be relayed back to home base to broadcast from any particular venue. And this is Alfred on the right of that Western Electric carbon microphone, Alfred Griebe, I should say, with the VHF transmitter. I think it would have been about 10 metres in those days, and the transmitting masts on the car. He was well known for that, among the first to do location broadcasting, outside broadcasts as we'd call it in this country. That's a picture of the transmitter used. He also made transmitters for marine stations, and that's one built by the Grebe concern on a ship. This particular photograph of Alfred Griebe shows him with what he called his clarifier. It was quite simply a broadcast band RF amplifier stage, and the idea of this was he'd retail it for a low price. And if people used this on their regenerative detectors, not only would it give them enhanced sensitivity, it would also reduce the radiation from the regenerative detector if too much regeneration was used and it gave out whistles over the air. That would be greatly reduced by putting this product, an RF amp, between the antenna and the receiver. And that's Alfred Griebe holding it. They advertised widely, and at this stage, October 1924, Grebe was getting into their stride with the production of probably their landmark model Synchrophase receiver. It employed all sorts of new developments for radio in it. Among them, neutralisation. They actually ran into trouble with the Heseltine patent over that, so that they could run a lot of gain in their RF amps without instability, and a number of other developments which I'll show as time goes on. An unusual radio, very much a lovely piece of furniture, and they sold for a very high price. I think it was $170 American, which at that time was 1 month's salary for the average worker. So this was a radio to appeal predominantly to the well-heeled. It was reviewed extremely well on a couple of occasions in QST. This is the review from October 1924, obviously. And one of the things that they did as an innovation was the so-called straight-line frequency variable condenser. Most variable condensers up to this time, air-spaced variable condensers, had semicircular plates, and a semicircular plate meshing with its companion fixed plates would give you, for every angular change of the dial, a wavelength change that was equivalent. The trouble was, on the broadcast band, the stations are not spaced by wavelength, they're spaced fairly equally by frequency. And to get a straight line frequency condenser, you need specially shaped plates. They've become much more the rule these days, that are somewhat lopsided, sort of square law. As you turn the knob, the frequencies are equally spaced rather than the wavelengths, and this became standard after Grebe employed them in the Synchrophase, which I think was the first American receiver to employ straight-line frequency condensers. That's Grebe's version that went into the Synchrophase receiver. Notice the off-centre plates. One dial for convenience, even though they had two RF amplifier stages in it. There were ways and means that Grebe used to keep the three capacitors in sync. And it wasn't the way we gang capacitors today. You'll see what I mean in a moment. If you want information on the Grebe Synchrophase radios of the early 1920s, the best reference by far on the internet is a PDF file written by Dr. Hugo Holden, who's a fellow Australian, written in March 2015. Do look it up. He has one of the receivers himself and has done an extensive analysis of its electrical characteristics, and I think rightly claims that the remarkable radio is an excellent combination, as he says, of form and function, which by any standards past or present is extraordinary. And you'll see the production of these radios in a film that I'm about to show. That's the top view of the radio from Holden's paper, and you'll notice at the bottom that the three variable capacitors, the aerial tuning, the tuning between the two RF stages, and the tuning between the RF stage and the detector, the capacitors are all linked by chains, and these chains could either be operated holus-bolus with the three capacitors working in tandem, or you could de-link the three capacitors and adjust them individually. An interesting sort of a development. Up to that time, this sort of radio would have had three separate tuning controls. This is Holden's drawing of the circuit of the Grebe Synchrophase, and it had a number of very innovative innovations in it. One was the use of so-called binocular coils, which relate more to toroidal coils than solenoids, although they were two solenoids side by side. They were connected in such a way that they didn't radiate much external field. And this had tremendous advantage when you had a succession of RF stages where you wanted to reduce the inductive coupling between one RF stage and the next. You'll also notice variable neutralizing capacitors there, which would neutralize the grid to plate capacitance of the tube in such a way that there wouldn't be positive feedback within the RF stages, thereby making them very passive, not prone to instability. Grid leak detector is in the third valve, and two stages of audio with the second stage capable of driving a horn loudspeaker of the time. All ran on batteries, of course, bright emitter tubes. Most of them, I think, were 201As. One of the most basic tubes of all, made by Western Electric, apart from other people. Another view, looking into the top of the Grebe Synchrophase receiver. It had been set up, the master dials, with gradations accounting for different wavelengths which were listed, so you could actually calibrate the thing. And these are the binocular coils that I was talking about earlier. Two coils wound in antiphase but connected in series in such a way that they were wound with high-Q Litz wire and covered with rather nice green silk, as you see there. And the binocular coil concept was actually patented by the Grebe firm, justifiably. There you see the principle of the binocular coils. They were connected in such a way that the magnetic field around them would tend to concentrate in the two coils rather than going outside the coils as it would with a normal single-ended solenoid. So this was an interesting development. Don't think it's a principle that's been used any time since, surprisingly. And Grebe's made a great fanfare about that and advertised not only the sensitivity but the selectivity, the ability to reject unwanted stations that was produced by the usage of that binocular coil system. unique to the Grebe design. And here's someone actually using the set. The variable condensers were mounted vertically and operated by thumb screws. There's the price of the Synchrophase, $170, a full month's wage for the average worker at the time. So these appealed mostly to the well-heeled, and the implication of this advertising photo was that if you could afford your own tennis court and a 2-storey house with 12 rooms, you could afford the Synchrophase. And that particular Synchrophase is operating with a frame antenna at the back, as you can probably see, completely self-contained. The radio itself is sitting on a low wooden box which contains the A, B and C batteries for the filament, the filament, the plate and the grid bias respectively. 1924 that would have been. I think I've dated this from the copy of Radio News that the chap on the left is actually holding under his arm. These radios were sold to a number of high-profile purchasers, particularly in the Hollywood area, who were making a huge amount of money from their silent films. Rudolph Valentino is seen here operating one, sitting beside his wife of the time, Natasha Rambova. Clara Bow, the first screen sex symbol, with her specially designed cabinet version of the Grebe Synchrophase. Seen here fondling the thing, so she must have spent a pretty penny on that, I should imagine. And Grebe also used to sell spare parts, dials, binocular coils, valve sockets. They worked to a manufacturing model that has never been really repeated since. Every component inside the radio was produced from scratch, from blank metal and bakelite, by the Grebe factory itself. They didn't actually buy capacitors from one source and resistors from another source and valves from a third source. Everything was actually, with the exception of the valves, everything was made in the Grebe factory in Long Island, as you'll see. Completely self-contained factory making everything for these radios. The straight-line frequency condensers, the volume controls, all of this was made in the Grebe factory. There's the instruction manual for the receiver, and lavishly illustrated, I might add, as you would expect from a high-priced receiver of the type. And now the film. One of the earliest films of radio manufacturing surviving anywhere, 1925, making the Synchrophase at Grebeland, and that's the Grebe factory in Jamaica Avenue, Long Island. Making the dials. They were made of bakelite, made on site. Here you see the ferrules being inserted in the mould, and then he taps the ferrules into place, dusts them out. Now he's pouring phenolic powder into the mould, and he places the top on the mould. Bakelite has to be produced under considerable heat and pressure, and these are the bakelite moulding machines, steam heated. Now he takes the mould out of the moulding machine, taps the ferrules out, and there are the moulded bakelite dials. Punch presses cut and form metal parts of the Synchrophase, and they're punching out metal parts for the valve sockets, for the transformers, you name it. This is all done on site at that factory. I think here they're cutting out E's and I's for the audio transformers, the 2 audio transformers that were used in the Synchrophase receiver. All done on site. High-speed automatic press punching out audio transformer parts. These are clamps for the edges of the audio transformer being made in this thing, I think. You can see the stamper in the middle there. Chaps feeding in sheet metal in a strip there, and out of it is coming the shaped and punched parts for the audio transformer. All automated, very advanced for 1925. So they were making huge numbers of these receivers, and the factory employed quite a large number of staff. Just checking. They even made the screws to hold the parts in the machines together, and this is turning out by automation, mechanical automation in those days, no computer involved. This thing just takes the metal rod and makes it into a screw quickly. There, the chap on the left is holding one of the screws there, checking the part for accuracy with micrometer screw gauge. They didn't even have to buy screws from other manufacturers. They could make them themselves to their own length and thickness and whatever. Fine sets require fine tools, and they had a lot of tools in the tool shop. This is it. You can see an automatic planing device in the background there. A lot of the cabinets for these were made of wood at this stage. Grinding a die for punching out transformer shells. All done with overhead belting driving the machinery in the old steam-driven way. Shaping steel plate for the drill jig. Tedious way of doing it, but that's the way they did it in 1925. Machining the drill jig plate. This is VK3AML testing on 147.475 and running a YouTube live stream. There you can see them milling off the edge of a plate for the manufacture of the receivers. Nickel plating the various parts of the Synchrophase. This was needed for dial parts and stabilising brass parts for atmospheric exposure. All done by electroplating in these electroplating baths by this chap. Nickel plating, it's fairly benign process, doesn't require the nasty chemicals of chromium plating used later on. And notice the overhead belting going to overhead bands running down to a steam engine somewhere nearby. All of that would have taken... There's nickel-plated screws coming out. Now assembling the parts into complete radios, they had lines of girls on conveyor lines, not unlike the methods used by Henry Ford for the production of the T model at that stage. Probably all been the subject of time and motion specialists. They're all going for their lives. Winding the rheostat elements. A common way of varying the volume out of these radios at the time was to have a rheostat, a variable resistor, in series with the valve filaments, and this is the lady winding the nichrome wire for those. Now this is not the rheostat. This is actually winding the binocular coils from Litz wire, and yet this is the machine that was used to do it, and the girl doing it, she's working with a foot control and a hand brake. There must have been some sort of a treadle arrangement for this. And there you see the nice green silk-covered wire being put onto one of the solenoids, and two solenoids would make up a binocular coil. The endless conveyor carries on. Modern manufacturing of radios on wooden bases still, but nevertheless the lady on the left just put a chassis onto the belt. The lady on the right takes it, puts a few more components on. There are also men working on the heavier components there, as you can see. All this taken on a 16mm camera in 1925. This is the receiver taking shape. The device he's putting on there is a wave change switch. The Synchrophase receiver covered the broadcast band in two ranges, one from 500 kilohertz approximately up to about 1200 kilohertz, and an overlapping range from I think 900 kilohertz to 2 megs. So this could receive 160 meters. And they make a big thing of the tuning being all from one control, though driven, as you will see, by chains that held the three tuning capacitors together via Bakelite pulleys that had been notched to suit the chain. All very clever. And there's the assembled chassis for the radio with the square law capacitors all rotating. Putting the Synchrophase on the air, this is the test. They wouldn't have had to have much of an antenna there to test these radios with voltage applied, because they had a broadcast station on the roof of the building, so very handy. Here's the guy actually assembling the 201A valves into the sockets. Away he goes. They're bayonet sockets in those days, not the pin sockets of later period. And I think he's adjusting the neutralising capacitor there, making sure that the tuning runs free and true, and then doing a test, listening in on a loudspeaker, which is obscured. It's the bit at the back. Packing section was an important point. These had to be dispatched all over the world, so they were first of all wrapped in brown paper, then surrounded by compressible cardboard, as you see, then put into a first cardboard box with packing. Being a high-class, expensive product, it was important that these would get to the consumer with a minimum of damage, so that box was then put into a larger cardboard box for dispatch. Nicely printed cardboard box with advertising the wares. You see the type number there, MU1. That's the Synchrophase MU1. There was an MU2 that was introduced, I think, late in 1925, which rather dates this film. Give it a good hit. There's the catalogue that comes with the radio, and a picture of the Grebe factory. Out the front of the factory onto Jamaica Avenue, this rather exquisite hard rubber tired truck is taking a large shipment of Grebe Synchrophase receivers for dispatch to the wider world, probably by ship as much as for local sales. Lovely truck, I must say. Most of the bodywork, as you'll see in a minute, is wood, and the driver's cabin is built somewhat in the style of a telephone booth, with wooden doors and little glass squares, as you'd find in the, I suppose, the toilet window of a house today. There we are. Truck is certainly a thing of beauty. I wonder if that survived somewhere. Probably hasn't. These things were given fairly heavy treatment. Tarpaulin goes over the top, as it still does to this day with trucking. Picture taken from the top of the Grebe works, now back down at the entrance. A final look at the shipment of Grebe radios. This film, by the way, is available in very much lower definition on several places on the internet. I went to the point of re-downloading the original high-def file from the Internet Archive, which is where the original comes from. People don't seem to realise. Look at that, a wooden door, like you'd find on a house. And away goes the truck. I wonder what sort of truck that is. Somebody might like to fill us in. There can't have been too many of them made. Look at the carbide lamps. It goes back a bit, that truck, probably a bit before 1925. And off down, that would be Jamaica Avenue, I think. Candid shots were tacked on the end of the film, and whenever you point a home movie camera at people, even today they tend to do this sort of thing. In 1925 it was no different. Go on, pull a face. There you go. For posterity. That's probably Mr. Grebe. I've not worked that out, but there you go. Anyway, you've just been looking at one of the earliest surviving films of radio manufacture. Just checking that we've got no copyright problems. No copyright problem with that. Good. This is VK3AML with a regular Saturday night test transmission. And I thought that rather than just going from one item to the next, I should probably intersperse them with non-advertisements. Advertising on ham radio is illegal. But where you have an advertisement for a product that's defunct, I don't think it comes into the heading of advertising at all. It's more historical interest. So I'll bring up an item for your edification. This is VK3AML.
Sometimes when you have a special problem, you just don't know where to turn. Here's a good suggestion from a famous product.
One of those nights, you know what the problem is. Your system isn't doing its job. Constipation. A very real problem at times. Where do you turn? To the laxative more people turn to than to any other. To X-Lax, the gentle, dependable, overnight laxative. Only X-Lax has a medically approved laxative ingredient in convenient chocolated tablets to help your system do its job again. A laxative ingredient a recent medical book calls very reliable, quote, for use at bedtime to produce results much like normal in the morning, unquote. Results much like normal in the morning. Now you feel refreshed, renewed. X-Lax, the gentle, dependable, overnight laxative. Now the world looks good to you again.
Yes, when party political broadcasts and parliamentary broadcasts are not enough, try X-Lax, and that advert dates from about 1960. So God knows what was in the X-Lax, perhaps sugar-coated tapeworm eggs, who knows. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, just checking on our stream again. Seems okay. And now, an item of more serious interest. The US Signal Corps during the Second World War and also at Korea were involved with not only signals but motion picture production, and quite often they would produce motion pictures of technical developments in United States military signals, so far as they were free to allow the information out. Generally they would allow a lot of information to go to public usage, except for that related to ciphers and codes for obvious reasons. So here, from 1952, the Signals Corps doing coverage of their own activities.
Welcome to the Big Picture. I'm Captain Carl Zimmerman, here to tell you about your United States Army. And today, the Big Picture shows you how the Signal Corps serves as the eyes and ears of your Army. You'll see how the Signal Corps, using highly specialized skills, devices, and techniques, provides the intricate communications and other facilities without which modern warfare would be impossible. Signal Corps photographers, overseas and elsewhere, have filmed many of the pictures you see on this program. And now, the eyes and ears of your Army, the Signal Corps.
This is war, modern technological war, a war of speed, movement, and quickly concentrated firepower. A fluid kind of war in which surprise is a major weapon. Today, more than ever before in our history, our Army must operate as a closely knit team. The action of each unit must be perfectly controlled. It must be timed and coordinated with the actions of all other units. Communications are vital for a rapid exchange of facts and the fast transmission of orders. In the United States Army, it is the Signal Corps that maintains these nerves of communication. The Signal Corps designs and develops equipment. installs it, and operates it. Wire and radio are integrated into a single fast-moving system to form the eyes and ears of command. In war, the role of the Signal Corps is vital. In modern war, it may be decisive. Swift new weapons require swift countermeasures, split-second warning devices, and high-speed communications. Signals must outspeed the fastest plane and outdistance the rocket. Distances are steadily shrinking. A direct attack from another continent is possible. Our military communications must be ready for such a challenge. This is the prime responsibility of the Signal Corps. Today it maintains a vast network of wire and radio channels that link Washington immediately with the Far East and Europe, with the most remote outposts on our far-flung defense perimeter. Modern global warfare requires a worldwide communication system of unprecedented size and complexity. Such a system has been set up by the Signal Corps. This system must provide instant communication with any part of the world and carry the traffic necessary for close coordination of widely dispersed forces. The key to this system is a global network to link Washington directly with each theater of operations and carry instant warnings of impending enemy air attack to our continental defense centers. In each theater, we establish and maintain a network to link all elements, ground, air, and naval units, command, intelligence, and supply. The network has multiple circuits to provide alternate routes if any are destroyed by enemy action. Finally, in each theater, we have a combat network adapted to the conditions of modern mobile warfare. Communications in battle must be swift and flexible without giving vital information to the enemy. Let us take, for example, the first stages of an amphibious assault. These are the critical moments when precise timing counts most, when success may depend on a momentary advantage. Among the first troops on the fire-swept beachhead are Signal Corps units working with the Navy to establish vital ship-to-shore communication. Means must be flexible. The signal must go through. Today we are fighting in the mountains of Korea, where towering ridges separate our mobile frontline units and interrupt radio-telephone communication. Messages must get through. The Signal Corps is using planes and even homing pigeons as couriers. They use radio relays to hurdle the mountains. Here, a Signal Corps convoy makes the difficult climb to a mountaintop to install a station that will link a forward division command post with Corps headquarters. These stations provide a very high-frequency radio beam to carry radio telephone messages from point to point. Range is limited to the horizon. Since the beam is directed from station to station, there is maximum security against enemy interception. The equipment is portable and relatively easy to install. The relay mechanism permits messages to pass from telephones to the multiple channel radio beam and back again. It also is adapted to the transmission of teletype, facsimile, and television. It is a major factor in increasing the speed and flexibility of our combat communications. The station is complete after the numerous tests and servicing adjustments are made. Today, as in the past, the Signal Corps keeps pace with the increasing speed and complexity of modern warfare. The Signal Corps has participated in the development of many of the electronic devices now used by our armed forces. It devised the controls for the television bomb. A television camera mounted in the nose of the bomb transmits a picture that shows the location of the target. Now, watch the operator steer the bomb by radio. A direct hit.
What a waste of an iconoscope.
Partly the work of Signal Corps engineers was the proximity fuse in aerial bombs and rockets. A major innovation in World War II, the proximity fuse greatly increased the lethal effect of our weapons. A delicate electronic device, it automatically explodes a projectile just before it reaches the target. Assistance was given in the development of a technique to detonate mines by radio signal. The enemy can't explode the mines unless they know the combination of our frequencies. These combinations are set up through the use of a standard telephone dial. Motion pictures made by the Army Pictorial Service of the Signal Corps have helped to train every man in the Army, whatever his job. Training films are estimated to cut down the training time by at least 30%, and at the same time coordinates and unifies the Army's training programs. New tactics demand new techniques. An airborne invasion depends on a concentration of forces. The Signal Corps designed means to achieve this end, the Rebecca-Eureka system. In advance of the landing, a paratrooper is dispatched to the designated drop zone. He carries a radio that establishes a directional beam. His part of the system is Eureka. Troop carriers follow with Rebecca interrogators to pick up Eureka's beacon. The Eureka beacon then guides them to the spot where the paratroops must drop. Movement of men and equipment to the airhead is precise, not a matter of guesswork. The Signal Corps was a pioneer in the field of radar, including radar for aircraft. This pilot, after dark, is looking for Boston. Signal Corps radar shows him the way. Here is what he sees as the sensitive echoes appear on his scope. The white spots are Boston and the surrounding cities. This gives him his bearing. With this device, bombers of the U.S. Air Force can now find and hit their targets at any time of day or night and in any weather. Signal Corps radar today is the electronic eye that enables our troops in the field to spot hidden enemy mortars and artillery from the arc of their shells in flight, to obtain necessary data for accurate counter-battery action. This same electronic eye today gives the signal to other electronic devices that automatically aim an anti-aircraft battery.
Just interrupting that for a moment, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima on 147.475 and on YouTube live stream by Googling VK3AML 30 April 2022. And the film I'm currently running on the YouTube live stream is of the US Army Signal Corps activities during the Korean War. This will include a long description of the technical equipment towards the end of the documentary. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, back to the film.
The Signal Corps is the Army's official weather observer. Among the Signal Corps' weather instruments is an automatic weather station which can secure data even from points behind enemy lines. This delicate instrument is known as radio sonde. Radio sonde automatically records and broadcasts at regular intervals changes in temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure, and gives it station identification. Signal Corps units were among the first to exploit the use of aircraft in warfare. From the Signal Corps' aeronautical section of World War I grew our present Air Force. Today, the Signal Corps again has an air section for photo reconnaissance. Through motion pictures and still photographs, we have seen the American soldier in the tense moment of actual combat. Think about the men who take these pictures. They have to be in the thick of the action. The Signal Corps combat photographers obtain a visual record of events at the front that is vital to our commanders in making decisions on strategy and tactics. These combat photographers help to fulfill the Signal Corps' mission as the eyes and ears of the Army. To enable the Signal Corps to fulfill this mission most effectively, scientists and engineers are pursuing a wide range of researches. In its own laboratories at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and under contract in civilian institutions, here, science is serving our national defense. Today, the main focus of this research is in the field of electronics, on the electron tube, which is the key to radio, radar, television, telephoto, and numerous other devices. The useful electromagnetic spectrum is being extended through microwave radar bands to wavelengths approaching infrared radiation. To develop new electron tubes for narrow beam communication and high definition radar. Signal Corps scientists are exploring the properties of the quartz crystal, the vital component that controls the frequency of most radio transmitters. Today, a synthetic substitute is being produced. Quartz crystals are a strategic item which the U.S. normally must import from abroad. A special heat processing method plays an important part in prolonging the life and efficiency of the crystals. Our scientists are studying the chemistry of batteries and developing new types to make portable radios lighter and smaller without loss of range. Battery capacity has been increased as much as 5 times, while weight has been cut in half. New power equipment is being designed, from compact 150-watt units to giants producing 15,000 watts for round-the-world radio transmitters. One of the problems of basic research is to discover how these radio waves travel. To probe the secrets of wave propagation, rockets carry signal corps apparatus 100 miles into the upper atmosphere. The Signal Corps made man's first contact with the moon. In a test to define the outer limit of radar, its scientists directed radar pulses upward through the ionosphere toward the surface of the moon and recorded the echoes that returned across a void of 200,000 miles of outer space. The Signal Corps is developing mobile television to flash battle scenes to our commanders and serve as the electric eye for our Army. Signal Corps technology is integrating radio and wire into a single fast-moving communication system. It is possible now for this man to communicate directly not only with this man and this man, but also with this man, so that all of them fight as a team. This solves only one problem. All equipment must be highly mobile to fit the tactics of modern warfare. It must be light and compact. Many new circuits no longer use conventional wiring. Instead, they are printed on strips, easily put into mass production. The Signal Corps has sharply reduced size and weight in a whole new series of portable radios for company and platoon. Field switchboards have been streamlined, but have greater capacity. Wire is lighter. During World War II, it took 2 men to lay wire with this cumbersome reel. The same footage now can be contained in a 26-pound package. It can be laid by 1 man. It can be laid by jeep or by plane over miles of rough country in a few minutes. Today's Signal Corps equipment is designed to withstand the roughest use and exposure in all kinds of weather. New specifications have to be met for new tactics of warfare. Size and weight are important in an airborne invasion. New techniques are devised to prevent breakage of fragile equipment. Here, a complete, very high-frequency radio station is deposited safely by parachute in the drop zone. Also airborne are the men of the radio operating crew. who descend by parachute to assemble and put into action the equipment after the drop. 6 special containers swathed in heavy canvas padding hold the complete assembly, including 2 dipole antennas, power unit, frequency testing oscillator, and the radio receiving and transmitting apparatus. Today's Signal Corps equipment must be ready to function in the heat and humidity of a tropical jungle, or at temperatures far below zero in Arctic and subarctic regions. To make sure that signal equipment meets these rigid requirements, it is tested in every conceivable way before it leaves Signal Corps laboratories. First, it is subjected to the rigors of an artificially produced Arctic climate, then to blistering artificial heat. It is subjected to intense vibration and severe shock. It is exposed to drenching rain and enveloped in penetrating fog. In war, both men and equipment must face wide variations in weather. Weather observations and forecasts are vital to our Air Force and to our ground forces to correct artillery and anti-aircraft fire. The Signal Corps has developed a whole series of new weather devices for a wide range of tactical situations. Airborne radio sondes transmit data on atmospheric conditions up to a height of 140,000 feet, and radar tracks the radio sondes to chart wind speed and direction. A special type of radar has been devised to detect nearby storms and long-range detection systems that automatically plot the position and path of a storm thousands of miles away. Special devices measure cloud ceiling and thickness, providing data vital to air safety. Charts based on weather data gathered by these and other Signal Corps devices quickly circulate by facsimile transmission through the arteries of the Army's integrated communication system, giving information to our forces that is vital in all tactical situations. Today's Signal Corps communications are the link that enables ground and air forces to cooperate directly in battle. Here, a frontline observer pinned down by the enemy accurately guides a bomber to an enemy bunker.
Just interrupting, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima on 147.475 with the usual Saturday night test transmission, concurrent with the YouTube live stream. If you Google VK3AML 30 April 2022, you should be able to get the video that goes with this audio. And this is a coverage of the work of the United States Signal Corps in 1952. We'll shortly be moving on to another film, more technical nature, of the first attempt at a passive communications satellite being launched, the Echo balloon of 1960. But at the moment we'll finish off the Signals Corps film.
If another world war should come to this nation overnight, the first threat to our country and its cities may be a long-range attack by transocean bombers or missiles. Today, electronic devices can detect and warn of the intruder's approach from a perimeter of ships at sea and from a rim of scattered outposts. Today, planes can travel at sonic speeds and faster. Warning signals and target data must travel at once through our signal systems to automatic plotting devices at fire direction centers for split-second counteraction. Today, our battlefront is both in the field and in the laboratory. In both, the Signal Corps has a major role.
You've seen what the Signal Corps is doing to carry out its function as the eyes and ears of your Army. The Corps utilizes the latest advances in technology to make our Army the most modern in the world today.
And now we move on 10 years to the early 1960s, to 1960 in fact, August 1960, to the first attempt by the United States with the Association of Bell Laboratories to do a satellite link-up from the east coast to the west in America by using a passive reflecting satellite, effectively a big silver-covered balloon called Echo. This was in 1960. So on to that documentary, The Big Bounce.
A hilltop in New Jersey. The setting, giant antennas like monstrous eyes and ears, straining, watching, waiting. Inside the control station, a team of specialists with ultra-sensitive electronic equipment ready to probe the vast reaches of the sky. These men are waiting for the climax of a dramatic experiment they've been working on for many months in collaboration with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. An experiment known by its code name as Project Echo. Men like Luke Lowry here, Dick Klon, Bill Snell, 4166, and Bill Jakes, project engineer, all scientists with the Bell telephone laboratories. In a few minutes, if things go right, Holmdel will communicate by telephone in a brand new way by routing the call through outer space to Goldstone, California, 2,300 miles away, where scientists of the Jet Propulsion Lab are waiting. This call will be bounced off a man-made satellite. If it works, it will be the first time voice has traveled from the Earth up to a man-made moon and back to Earth again. This is the satellite, a huge empty balloon, here shown while still in its hangar. The inflated balloon is 10 stories high, made of a strong, new aluminized plastic. Strong, yet only half as thick as the cellophane around a package of cigarettes. Its aluminum coating gives it nearly 100% reflectivity. That balloon will soon be hurtling across the sky 1,000 miles high over North America. Yes, these men know why they are on this New Jersey hilltop. But others may wonder, even if it works, so what? Who cares about bouncing messages off a space balloon? What's the practical good of it? We can telephone almost any place in the world today. Thanks to ocean cables, we can talk overseas as if to the phone next door. This year, about 3 million messages will be transmitted across the Atlantic. But 10 years from now, it is predicted there will be 21 million messages. More facilities will be needed. And there are the polar regions where severe atmospheric conditions make radio reception difficult. Here, particularly, the military need for alternate communication systems is great. Powerful microwave transmitters carry telephone calls over barren and open spaces. These systems will always serve us well. But today, as scientists look ahead, they foresee great gaps in our worldwide communications unless more and different systems can be devised. For instance, we would like to see live television programs, history in the making from all over the world. But TV broadcasting presents a special problem. One TV channel requires the space of almost 1,000 telephone circuits. This requirement is simply too expensive for present systems. And even if this problem could be licked today, what about tomorrow? For many years now, Bell Laboratories scientists have been looking ahead to satellites for communication. We are already capable of building a satellite equipped with operating receivers and transmitters which could be made to operate at a much greater height than a simple reflector balloon like that in Project Echo. The higher you go, the greater the portion of Earth in range of the satellite, and the fewer you need to circle the globe. A worldwide communication system of satellites like this has already been outlined by the Bell system. The plan envisions several strings of equipped satellites, altogether about 50 of them, orbiting at a height of about 3,000 miles. As the one you were using moves out of range, you would switch to the next one coming along, and so on. And if you wanted to send, say, a telephone message or a television program to some area not covered by any single satellite, the signals might be bounced from transmitter to satellite, back to Earth, up to a second satellite, and down to the destination. That way, you could maintain continuous transmission of telephone calls and television programs to various parts of the Earth. But scientists have conjectured even far beyond this. Perhaps someday it will be possible and worthwhile to put up a precisely positioned satellite 22,300 miles out, which at that distance would revolve in step with the Earth and would seem always to hang in the same place in the sky. If it became possible to put 3 such satellites in orbit, together they could cover the Earth. But this high orbit 22,000-mile system is at best far in the future. As scientists wait in New Jersey and California, today's experimental balloon satellite, the pioneer of worldwide space communications, is already up in the sky, 1,000 miles high, on its first 2-hour orbit around the Earth, hurtling through the vacuum of outer space, ready to relay telephone signals between powerful transmitters and receivers as far apart as New Jersey and California. The men in both locations know that when and if it does arrive, they will have approximately 15 minutes to bounce their messages from coast to coast off its surface. For in 15 minutes, it will have swept across the United States and be out of range. These men well know the complicated chain of events that is a natural part of missiles and space operations. Earlier in the day, the first big question was, would the missile system work? Hours before, down at Cape Canaveral, the Delta missile that would put the Echo balloon into orbit was on its launching pad. Ready to be guided through space by the command guidance system, located in the Bell Laboratories control station at the Cape.
Mode control switches.
Less than a minute remains in the countdown.
13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
As the missile hurtles through space, the control center maintains communication with it, checks its position, and automatically sends any necessary steering orders to keep it on its predetermined path. This guidance system was designed by Bell scientists, the same system that meets the precise target demands of the Titan intercontinental ballistic missile. Its job here is to put the Echo satellite in orbit with pinpoint accuracy. Will it? That is the question these men ask themselves as they finish monitoring the guided portion of the missile's flight. And will the balloon, squeezed into a 26-inch sphere, release okay? Will it inflate properly or burst into fragments? They still have to wait. High in the sky, the third stage burns out. The payload section separates from the engine. The protective shell springs apart, releasing the balloon. Floating clear, the balloon is inflated by a chemical powder which instantly vaporizes in the vacuum of outer space. The men won't know it for some time yet, but balloon inflated and in orbit. As the minutes pass, scattered tracking stations take up the difficult job of finding the balloon and tracking it. Now it's up to Bill Jakes and these other communications men in New Jersey and California to find it. When they do, in addition to transmitting tape-recorded messages, they will talk together on the telephone. But until then, they still have their worries. This new, unique horn-type antenna, so painstakingly developed here in Holmdel, will it really eliminate static? It should, with the help of new circuitry and this other recently developed equipment called the maser. These inventions will make the weakened voice signals come in strong and clear, even after their long journey through space. This is no ordinary amplifying device. It operates in an ultra-cold vat of liquid helium at minus 457 degrees Fahrenheit. In this super cold world, the maser's ruby crystal helps keep the telephone conversation clear and easy to hear, which makes the maser one of the greatest new contributions to communications. At last, the sweating out period is about over. Holmdel is in constant touch with Goldstone by an open telephone line. The first actual transmission bounced off a man-made satellite will be from tape recordings. Goldstone has just reported they have picked up the balloon. A pinpoint in the sky, 100 feet wide, 1,000 miles out in space. Like trying to locate a golf ball a mile away.
We have it now, Bill.
Good. Let's hope we can keep it. The signal looks good, Luke. Tracking looks good, too. Let's see how Goldstone is doing. Hello, Goldstone. This is Holmdel. We're getting your signal. How are you receiving ours?
Strong and steady, Bill.
Fine, fine. Okay, here we go. We're going to start our tape now, and you start yours.
This is President Eisenhower speaking. It is a great personal satisfaction to participate in this first experiment in communications involving the use of the satellite balloon known as ECHO. This is one more significant step in the United States program of space research and exploration. The program is being carried forward vigorously by the United States for peaceful purposes for the benefit of all mankind. The satellite balloon, which has reflected these words, may be used freely by any nation for similar experiments in its own interest. Information necessary to prepare for such participation was widely distributed some weeks ago. The United States will continue to make freely available to the world the scientific information acquired from this and other experiments in its program of space exploration.
It really sounds good here, Walt.
Fine, Bill.
And so the first spoken word from man through space to his own satellite and back to man again is the voice of the President of the United States. And as the satellite sweeps swiftly out of range, further transmission must wait for another passage. Now, sometime later, as the balloon again passes over America, the same scientists try the first telephone conversation ever bounced from a man-made satellite.
You can fire up the transmitter.
Right.
Hello, Goldstone. This is Holmdel calling. Calling Goldstone. How do you read me?
Holmdel, this is Goldstone. You're loud and clear, Bill.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it looks like all the hard work was really worth it.
A new, bold stride on a long road has been taken. The road to communications between ourselves and others overseas with the same variety and dependability we now enjoy anywhere in our own country. The balloon satellite of Project ECHO is, of course, for experiment only. But it is an experiment that may result in a new intercontinental communication system. As these men of Bell Laboratories and Western Electric continue their round-the-clock program of research and development, they are determined to keep America well ahead in the field of communications. And today they are looking, as all humanity looks, to the vast potentials of outer space.
And of course the Americans tend to milk it for all of the emotion that it's capable of with America, America, my country, 'tis of thee. So that was from 1960. We now jump ahead 10 years, actually 13 years, to 1973, and the usage of UHF for probing pulsars. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima.
Space is vast, beyond human comprehension. Scattered throughout its black endlessness are vast gatherings of stars, thousands of millions of stars, together forming galaxies, such as the one in which we live. Some stars are beginning, others are aging. In each galaxy, all types may be found, and sometimes stars explode. The cataclysm's so intense that the star becomes brighter than all the other stars in the galaxy combined, and with such violence that vast amounts of matter are thrown out, and what remains is crushed into a super-dense neutron star. At the Quabbin Reservoir in western Massachusetts, radio astronomers are studying these phenomena. Isolated from thickly settled, noisy areas, they monitor the stars. Dr. G. Richard Huguenin is one of this new breed of astronomers. Instead of peering at the stars with an optical telescope, he comes to the remote facility to use computer-controlled electronic instruments to observe their signals. His specialty concerns the mysterious pulsars, stars that send out pulsing radio signals, which have been determined to be neutron stars. His research equipment is gigantic, and it dwarfs him as he inspects it. He uses radio collectors that use powerful sensors to detect the pulsar signals. Radio signals that are yet so faint that a number of these antennas are used to monitor their pulsations. The study of pulsars goes on at any time, for these telescopes do not need night in order to do their work. A neutron star, a pulsar, is located in what remains of a supernova explosion. A star so dense that a thimbleful of its matter would weigh millions of tons. The computer points the antenna sensors to pick up its signals. They are fed along signal lines from the antennas to the instruments that will analyze them, and through the circuitry that refines them and strengthens them. A researcher gets initial indications of the pulsar signals before computer analysis takes place. The signals, for all their amplification, are still weak and need to be strengthened. And at this point, the computer, a Digital Equipment Corporation PDP-12, is used to analyze the signals through programs developed specifically for this purpose. By communicating to the computer through its terminal, Dr. Huguenin can obtain the precise program that he requires for the analysis. Using a technique known as signal averaging, the computer can examine the regularly occurring pulse beats of the stars in such a way that the signals are strengthened. And data previously lost in the noise can be recovered for the scientists to examine. And from this, new things can be learned about the characteristics of pulsars, things that may be essential clues to the actual structure of these stars. The PDP-12 both controls the instruments and makes preliminary analyses of the signal. computer programs expressly developed for laboratory use are employed for this purpose. And when required, the computer will store the results on large reels of magnetic tape that can be taken to a larger computer for other analyses if desired. The results tell us more about the secrets of the stars. Listen now to a pulsar, a pulse beat of the universe.
And the music that was behind that, I would think, is among the most annoying backgrounds I think I've ever heard put on a film. This is VK3, Alpha Mike Lima, with the regular Saturday night test transmission and live stream. Just checking on the printed text. Hello to Paul, VK3HN, Terry, VK3FTZD, John Young. We had ZL1BQD Rolly on a little earlier, but I think it's sufficiently late that he's probably departed by now. Hopefully he'll be seeing the playback on a later occasion. And VK3WWW, Jack, I see, is also on the stream. Hello, Jeff Sylvester and VK3 Zulu Bravo. Well, going back to the first clip we played, I talked about straight line frequency variable capacitors. The original variable capacitors available about the time of the First World War and before were rather like this. The plates were completely circular in cross-section. You can see them there. This is a transmitting variable capacitor of 1500 puff that I picked up while I was in San Francisco about 13 years ago from a little place called Al Lasher Electronics, which has since closed. But this circular variable capacitor design, as you tune it in parallel with an inductor, for each angle of change of the orientation of the plates gives you a linear relationship, in this case, to wavelength. And if you take the capacitor out to where it's almost fully unmeshed at that end, what this does in a broadcast receiver using this semicircular design is to bunch up the spacings of the radio stations at the high frequency end of coverage. So in the early 1920s, this sort of design of variable capacitor came out. This is the shape, see the shape of those vanes? This is to give a linear relationship between change of frequency and the angle of those plates. So at the low frequency end it tunes with a great change of capacitance, and at the high frequency end with less change of capacitance. Therefore, the rotation of that capacitor will be directly related to frequency rather than wavelength. And that was developed first in the early 1920s, suggested, but I think I'm right in saying that the first commercial broadcast receiver using that straight line frequency system was the Grebe Synchrophase, which you saw under manufacture in that film of 1925. It's 10:58. I might just, before we go to open up on 147.475 for a QSO, I'll bring up one more advert. This is just as a bit of a joke. In 1978, there was a type of reducing pill or reducing food that had the most unfortunate name that's ever been given a product. The name killed the product. And here it is.
Candy. amazing. And I'm not gaining weight. I'm losing weight deliciously with the aid of AIDS. The AIDS diet plan really works.
AIDS candy contains a safe and effective appetite suppressant when used as directed. Helps curb your appetite so you can lose weight. And AIDS candy has no stimulant that can make you nervous.
The plan lets you enjoy 2 AIDS before each meal. Delicious chocolate flavor. And I love being a size 10 again.
Lose weight deliciously with the aid of AIDS.
Oh dear. I think that's probably the biggest advertising blunder I have ever witnessed. You can imagine what happened after the epidemic started in 1981. Within about 8 years, that product was forced off the market. Be warned, strange things can happen even if you use an unusual name for a product. Anyway, with that, it's 11 p.m. I'll just change my mode of monitoring so I can hear stations coming back to me over 2 metres. I monitor now off the mixer, not off the check receiver. So this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima putting out a CQ call for anybody who might be listening on 147.475 and standing by for any calls.
Yeah, VK3 Alpha Charlie Zulu.
Have we got any other takers? VK3ACZ, acknowledge. VK3AML, standing by.
Thank you very much, Jude, and thank you all for joining us here this evening. As a criminal, the thing I love is corruption, and I'm sure you've seen many examples. We're all pretty used to corruption by government.
Well, who knows what's to make of that. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. Somebody obviously saw the Frank Thring advert for getting a licence and getting a call sign. We'll hand it over to you, Peter. VK3ACZ. And no group at this stage, VK3AML.
VK3AML, not in the group. VK3ACZ returning. Good evening, Chris. Good evening, potential listeners and others. Where do I start tonight? Well, you finished with the AIDS candy. It worked for me. That'd help me lose weight, and anybody else too. Way better than the X-Lax. Yeah, I think I could avoid that one. Clara Bow. Oh, be still my beating heart. What a gorgeous honey there. I have to confess that I'm not familiar with the lady. I mean, my all-time favourite Hollywood starlet was Zazu Pitts, so perhaps I go for the more plain and ordinary than that, but a great look there. With the military video, I liked it when they said we're doing research into radio wave propagation. Yeah, give them more bullets. Loved the portable antennas. I could just see myself putting up one of those masts. And with the manufacture of the radios back in 1925 in the production line, oh boy, you reminded me of a school vacation job I had when I was about 15 or 16. I worked in a tool room in Brooklyn, and my ambition at that stage was to be a fitter and turner. I was cured by a couple of weeks of school vacation work where it was pretty much a production line thing where I just cut sheets of steel into smaller pieces so that they could be put into a lathe to be machined up with various bits on them. And it just reminded me of that, seeing those people, men and women, working on that production line, but what an interesting product. And it reminded me that I would... I'd almost kill to be able to have a walk through the Yaesu or the ICOM factory at the moment, especially as I use, well, the majority being Yaesu products, only one ICOM, the 7300, but would love to see how they're being manufactured. Probably spoiled by automation, but still all the same. Very interesting. Loved your selection of videos tonight. They're always good. You never disappoint. But particularly good having the... I suppose my highlight, other than seeing Clara Bow, was the walk through the radio manufacturing process, even down to their own screws. for securing in the cabinets and such. Anyway, back to you. Hope Dave or somebody else is there to join us tonight. Come on down so we can call it officially a group, VK3AML. I hope you're well. Hope you've had a good week, Chris. VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
Oh, VK3ECG.
G'day, Dave. VK3ECG and the group, VK3AML. Have had a very good week, but looking after Prue, I can't get away from home very much. So that was the reason why I've been trawling obscure internet sources, particularly the old Internet Archive, which people very rarely dip into these days. YouTube has more or less taken over the video storage that they used to do, but in their period of vogue in the last decade of the 20th century and the first decade of the 21st, they managed to store a lot of interesting information on video that's not duplicated elsewhere. Appears to get very little coverage these days and is well worth downloading, even though you have to download it fairly slowly. It's an old-fashioned download system that hasn't got the speed of YouTube. I think that's probably what killed it largely as a storage system, but it's still there. And they have a lot of material from United States government and United States military, as you could see, in reasonably good nick. Which is well worth looking at from the point of view of technical documentary. There's a lot of technical documentary films there. There's only one major source, which is verboten, and that's Periscope Films, which operates as a commercial film footage library. And needless to say, if you tried to put that onto YouTube live stream, you'd soon get a notice, cease and desist, or we will terminate the stream, as they automatically generate with a bot whenever internet detects anything pirated. So I've actually checked on the live stream and no copyright objections at this stage. That government stuff largely is made available to the public in America on the understanding that anybody can use it for any purpose. So consequently, when I can't get out and about with a video camera to take much myself, and that's the case at the moment, Prue's needing fairly constant care, not so much because of her physical state, but she can't get out to the shops to shop. She has to have help with the moon boot, getting it on and off so that she can even lie down. So I have to be around fairly constantly. So for the next couple of weeks, it'll be largely stuff that I can either shoot on the premises here or that I can take off internet from hopefully obscure sources that few people have seen. I might add that all of the films that you saw tonight are nothing like the quality of the original sources. I had to go through the soundtracks of most of those films, flattening the audio frequency response by looking at troughs and peaks in the response with waterfall display, and then correcting it accordingly with parametric and graphic equalizers. Or, in more often the case, when the films had an optical soundtrack, that is a soundtrack photographed on the film, quite frequently they have large amounts of hum and sprocket buzz, and that can also be comb filtered off. So the results, I think, on most of those tonight were fairly acceptable, with the exception of the first one from 1925, which of course was silent. So I had to add the commentary myself from largely from the article written by Hugo Holden on the Grebe Synchrophase, which indicated what an extraordinary piece of design it was. Not just the design of the components themselves, but the layout was important in those days for high Q and stable operation. So round to Dave. How's your week been, Dave? With a pause for any breakers. VK3CG with a pause. VK3AML.
VK3BLX. Good evening. VK3ECG, yes. Fascinating set of videos tonight, actually. I'm sort of a bit wondering whether I should go for the most enjoyable scientific components or the most enjoyable advertisement components, which have their own interesting twists to them, I must say. Perhaps I'll come back to the ads later, because there's some great stuff and great stories around both those products, I suspect. But I must admit, I certainly like the Long Island factory, and it was a great find, Chris, and the beautiful MU1. A real sort of bit of cabinetry and fabulous bit of furniture as well. I must say some of those old radios would grace many I'm sure an elegant front parlour or whatever it would have been called in the day. One thing intrigued me was they had this Chinaman character on nearly all of the advertisements. And I wondered whether that was what the sort of cultural significance of that was. But anyway, yes, the week's been pretty good here. I've been doing a bit of constructing and trying to make one of these tiny little NFED antennas with building everything onto the back of the little BNC plug. So there's no separate box or anything. I'll be interested to see if that actually works or not. But we'll wait and see. Anyway, back to you, Chris. VK3AML and the group, VK3ECG.
Yes, thanks for that, Dave. VK3ECG, VK3 Alpha, Mike Lima. As I understand it from Holden's paper and from the many advertisements that were made in the early 1920s in journals like QST, Radio News, I can't think of any others at the moment. Probably Wireless World would have been included as well. They had this character, Mr. Wu, W-U, coming out with statements, profound statements about the quality of Grebe products. It was at a time when I think it was fashionable to quote Confucius, as in Confucius say, XXX. The female of the species is more deadly than the male, or something like that. And it became an advertising gimmick, and the Mr. Wu character runs through nearly all of the Grebe, I should say, Synchrophase. I was pulled up on that, checked with one of the people researching it, but apparently Alfred Grieb insisted on people pronouncing it in that way. I suspect that it's an Americanization of what originally might have been a French name, pronounced Grebe, or something like that. In terms of the construction of an NFED antenna, I'm curious as to know, are you using an ATU or a 9:1 ratio Balun with that? That's what most people seem to use with NFEDs. Anyway, I'll hand it over to VK3BLX, and I've forgotten your name again. VK3BLX and the group, VK3AML.
VK3AML and the group, VK3BLX. Ship handles John, Chris. Handles John. Great broadcast again tonight. I'm in test transmission, pardon me. I came in a bit late, so I had to do a little bit of fast forwarding along the way. So I sort of skipped over some of it, but what I was able to watch I found fascinating, as ever. Watching a bit about the Grebe radio construction, I was taken by the rather obvious lack of safety equipment around all the machinery compared to today. People putting hands in things awfully close to punches and this and that. So, oh gosh, makes the flesh crawl a little bit. It wasn't too uncommon for people to lose bits and pieces in those factories at times. So mercifully things have improved a bit there. Although while we might lose less fingers, we seem to have lost a lot of jobs along the way too, which is a bit of a complicating factor. I didn't make a lot of notes during the course of the transmission, because I was sitting in the lounge room watching it all on the big screen in there on YouTube, and it looked very good. Even the old footage comes up well, but certainly your live shots from the shack there, they are as crisp and clear as anyone could want. It's a really, really nice video. And certainly there's been no sign of, in the last couple of times I've watched over the last few weeks, no sign of any any data loss or, freezes or pixelation or anything. It's all been really good. Real comment on the background music there in the, if you could call it that, during the discussion of the pulsars. What came to mind was sort of one of those really old video games that had sort of suddenly gone bad. Oh, dear me. Who on earth thought that was a good idea? The other fascinating thing was the recording of the pulsar pulsing at the end of it. The very notion of something as unbelievably massive as a neutron star spinning at that speed, I mean, it really is difficult to comprehend, isn't it? And the other comment, what was the comment you were making about, are you fitting radios to a bike or something there, Dave? Tell us more. VK3AML in the group, VK3BLX.
I'll go over the top of that. VK3BLX and the group VK3AML. The safety considerations with those old factories were quite severe, particularly the overhead belting drive, the leather drive. Imagine what happens if something pushing a great deal of energy under torque, the belt was suddenly to break and to lash out at people. That is frightening. Peter Wolfenden, 3RV, is the third generation, I think, of a family who has run woodworking machinery factories, mostly in the western suburbs, for the last 100 years. He closed the factory on his retirement about 8 years ago. And he has photographs of his grandparents' factory, which had the overhead pulleys running from steam engines, centrally located, and the belts would come down to a clutch arrangement on each of the lathes or the milling machines that were required to run from the central motive power. It wasn't run by electricity commonly at that stage. And the mechanical problems that could occur with people interfacing with that equipment forcibly is quite frightening. It could rip arms off, you name it. But most of those people there seem to be well aware of the problem. And, basically, if you see bare wires coming out of a power point, you don't touch them. These days, I think the nanny state syndrome is such that we expect to put everybody into cotton wool or rubber gloves or multiple layers of insulation or whatever. And the OH&S, I looked up the toxicity of electroplating, and for nickel the toxic levels are not too bad. But when you get to chromium plating, which was commonly done in the 40s, 50s and 60s, the chemicals required for chromium electroplating are really appalling. And I believe that a lot of the plating companies locally in the 1970s and 80s were forced out of business by the need to literally clean up their act. So round to Peter, VK3ACZ, VK3AML.
VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ. I've just been looking up a bit about Clara Bow, and it looks like she had a tragic, sad and troubled life there at some stages. But I don't think you asked me the question about NFEDs, but I'll throw in a couple of things. The 9-to-1 Bell and Chris is popular with random length of wires, whereas the resonant length NFEDs usually seem to prefer a 49-to-1. But the thing about the pulsars, absolutely astounding that one I remember hearing about, and I've been out of touch with recent discoveries, though. It was thought to be 11 kilometres across, but it was spinning at 760 something RPM, give or take a second or two. Pretty incredible stuff. Does your head in, really. Now, there was something else I was going to say about tonight's broadcast, and it's slipped me. Not to worry, I should keep notes. Something I've been busy with this week. Dave, you'll appreciate this. And good evening, Dave, and good evening, John. So glad you could make it, so it's a group. I'm home carer for a lady, well, part-time home carer for a lady who fell and broke the other knob. A couple of years ago, she had a fall at home, and I actually had to break into the house to get to her. Well, I've kept keys ever since then, but anyway, she's in Box Hill at the moment, and I'm so gratified to know that at least they're allowed 2 visitors a day. It's still like getting into Fort Knox, but so that's been keeping me busy. But Chris, I thought you might like to know that the rag chewing on 20 metres has gone on without any trouble at all. I had a good, I think it was about a 45-minute chat with a French station on Utah Beach, near Utah Beach and Normandy there in France, and that was nice. Pretty good considering that there'd been some solar activity and we were in the middle of a G1 event. It seemed to perhaps affect 15 metres more than anything, because one of the nets I was on earlier today had signals going up and down like a yo-yo. But this week I also managed 10-metre contacts with Zambia, and of course I heard 9 Juliet something, and you know it's got to be good when you don't know what country that prefix is, and had to look it up in the call book before I called back. And the other one was a ZS in Port Elizabeth, which who said amateur radio isn't good for learning geography, because I had no idea that Port Elizabeth has had a name change. I won't try and pronounce the new name, but the fellow at the other end didn't seem to be too impressed with the name change. He kept insisting that as far as he's concerned it was still Port Elizabeth, but they were 2 good afternoon contacts on 10, so things are still going gangbusters on the bands, even if the solar flux has dropped a little bit. I mean, a week or 2 ago it was 160. But anyway, now what else can I add? 3 times since Easter on 20 metres I've spoken to a G station in Derbyshire. He's been running 10 watts and I've given him 5-9 reports each time. Pretty good. I've often said this, but I definitely joined the hobby at the right end there, because when I started 2 years ago, 10 and 15 were dead as, and things are really looking up, and 20, if anything, is probably too crowded with 9+ stations on the long path of an afternoon. But anyway, enough waffle about what I've been achieving. We can get back to tonight's topic of conversation in the next over. That Clara Bow, have to do some more research on her. Thanks for sharing there, Chris. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
Yeah, VK3ACZ and the group VK3AML returning. Port Elizabeth, I presume that's somewhere on the east coast of South Africa near Durban. And were you, just before we move on to Dave, were you communicating with them at your usual site in Belgrave Heights? VK3ACZ, just briefly, VK3AML.
No, that one was from the home QTH. I seem to have a lot less trouble on 10 metres than on the other bands for QR Mary. Back to you.
Interesting. So that the interference from sun lamps, and you know what I'm talking about, is less on 10 metres. I wonder why. Probably something to do with the resonance of the ballast used with the gas discharge lamps and the line outside. Who knows? Anyway, round to Dave, and I've been meaning to arrange with you, Dave, to do a bit of videoing of one of your outdoor episodes, but the portable working. But with Prue in her present condition, it won't be for a few weeks yet. I'll be looking after her fairly constantly. So, VK3CG and group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3ECG returning, yes. I completely understand. Absolutely, you've got a lot of work on to do at the moment, and to keep things going well, and to obviously help with the healing process, because all that sort of thing requires the right sort of support at the right time. Absolutely. I was yes, it's sad to hear it, Peter, about your person you care for. Fracture of femur are really just a dreadful problem. One of my friends was working on a issue for people wearing large inflatable bumpers on their hips in aged care facilities to stop people falling and breaking their hips. I'm not so sure it's necessarily always direct force that does it, but anyway, but it's unfortunately, as you know well, one of the things that is really quite a serious issue. I'm just going to correct your pronunciation. It's actually pronounced Derbyshire. As I used to live very close to Derbyshire, even though it's not spelt like that, as with so many things from the UK. But there we are. Yes, I must admit, when you start to talk about Grieb, the first thing that came to my mind, Chris, was the Peter Cook and Dudley Moore sketch of Sir Arthur. I think he kept calling him Grieb Streebling, and then being corrected as it was Arthur Streeb Griebling. But for some reason it kept jumping into my mind every time the name came on the screen. It's a fantastic sketch. But there we are. No, I must admit, the film, the background music, I had written down a note myself, annoying background music while it was playing. But it was nice to see an old PDP 12. I can actually remember some of those old machines in one of the university departments. And they were, so I think there was a PDP 11, wasn't there, as well? And I think there was one of those sort of sitting in a back room. But amazing those old things compared to what's available. Even only 5 years later, it's completely transformed. I must say, I quite like the one thing about the US, that portable antenna mast, and this obviously being filled, and this poor soldier chasing the cables that were being lofted at, and he's trying to jump up and grab them as they disappear as the antenna mast goes up. Something that sort of has happened to me on occasions, and then have to lower the mast down again. Yeah, we must have a go at some stage of that. It's a different sort of setup with inverted V dipoles, but it's certainly been reasonably successful. I haven't been on the air a great deal this week. I've listened about a bit, and certainly, I must admit, 20 metres was quite active with US stuff coming through really quite late on in the evening, and surprising to see what's happening at the moment. There's still the odd station around even now, which is interesting. Now, what is the other I had a few notes here, and yes, John. I was basically just trying to build one of those little kits for an end-fed half wave. So yes, as Peter's saying, it uses a 49-to-1 balance, but I don't know, isn't it really? But it's just the most incredibly fiddly piece of work I've ever done. I think it's about the little circuit, tiny circuit board would have been about 1.25 centimetres, I suppose, in diameter. The toroid was tiny. It literally goes on top of that board. The surface mount component, and you have to solder the toroid on while lifting it up to get your soldering iron underneath it in about 1/4 of an inch or less space. So the word fiddly comes to mind. I used a mixture of blue tack and a whole variety of other clamp and other arrangements just to stop the thing jumping out of my fingers or moving away when I was trying to solder. So it wasn't. But it seems to have worked. I've got to do some testing, but it seems to check out at the moment. If it doesn't, it will be a real pain to separate, to fix up. I did make a few other interesting sort of side notes. Yes, something. I thank you very much for the Mr. Wu issue. I hadn't quite realised that, but I thought it would have been something along those lines, a sort of some sort of mysterious East type thing of, as you know, the knowing all, or the all-knowing philosopher or something like that. But yeah, I must admit the X-lax was interesting. I mean, it always reminds me, because I think that's just a Cenopod stuff. But I also remember as a TV show, I think in the UK, I can't remember what it was now, but they used to challenge contestants, and they'd be blindfolded and have to taste things and things like that. And they had a nurse on the program as one of the candidates, and he was given this blindfolded and given this cup of tea, and told to have a drink and see what it was. And then up on the screen came, it was the Senna tea, and the audience was laughing away, and he took a sip of it, and that's interesting. It's quite nice actually. He had another big gulp, whereupon the audience roared with laughter, and then he proceeded to drink more of it, and eventually he couldn't guess what it was, but when he was told, I think there was slight mortification on his face. But I suppose in those days the nursing staff would have been handed out the Senna teas, but they probably didn't drink it themselves. So there we are. But of course, the most amazing thing I always think about for those sort of things is the antimony pills, which existed obviously literally from medieval times, and antimony is quite a nasty toxic metal, but doesn't dissolve that much, and certainly is quite an effective emetic and laxative. But of course, the great thing about it is it was part of the everlasting pill process, because you would retrieve the tablet, which did not dissolve, and then you would reuse it again. And indeed, it was passed down amongst families as family heirlooms. Anyway, this doesn't really bear thinking about terribly, does it? Back to you, Chris. VK3AML on the group, VK3ECG.
VK3ECG and group VK3AML. I don't know why they were there, but there was a group of vintage constipation advertisements on the net, some of which were rather amusing. There was also an advertisement I found for an anti-constipation. Apparently you can become addicted to such things. I'll see if I can find the here we are. Something called Carter's Little Liver Pills. I'll just run that.
If you sometimes need a laxative, but don't want to get the laxative habit, take Carter's Little Liver Pills and follow the Carter's 3-week plan. Thousands have gained natural regularity and broken the laxative habit. So can you. Here's what to do. Every night for 1 week, take 2 Carter's Little Liver Pills. Second week, 1 each night. Third week, 1 every other night. Then, nothing.
And the place goes out of business, which I think it did, because I haven't been able to trace this. Back to it.
Let me explain how Carter's can bring you natural regularity. Here is the lower digestive tract. Carter's Little Liver Pills free and relax the lower digestive tract. Carter's increases fluid and stimulates natural muscle contraction, and that means regularity. So for natural regularity, follow the Carter's 3-week plan. Get Carter's Little Liver Pills.
And break the laxative habit, whatever that might be. I'm not sure. Anyway, with that, I better hand it round to John, VK3BLX, presuming you're still there. VK3BLX, VK3AML.
VK3AML, the group, VLX. Oh, my goodness, how did we get to this? I don't think any of these ads quite come up to the good old standard of, Bill, come out to play.
Oh, his audio's gone.
Dave, that pill that you were talking about, which is a reusable one, it struck me that as well as its primary purpose, you also got a sort of free fecal transplant in the process, quite possibly. So it may have been, well ahead of its time. Yes, other comments. Dave, I thought exactly the same thing. As soon as the radio manufacturer's name came up, I thought of Arthur Grieb, who have I got it right? Arthur Grieb and his endeavours to teach ravens to fly underwater, as I recall. Crazy stuff, awfully funny. Peter. Okay, on the DX, I've noticed in my very infrequent sorties onto the HF bands lately that, certainly things are a bit lively. I haven't really looked at the higher bands above 20, but I've had a few contacts on 20, which is sort of unusual for my little setup here with just 100 watts and a wire dipole. But sort of a genuine 5 and 8, 5 and 9 into Belgium and some other good ones, France, Italy and so on. So, some awfully good conditions. I don't know whether they quite rival the sunspot conditions that existed when I first got my full license back in 1977. But I look at the old logbook here, and it just is chock-a-block full of every conceivable country. I had a sort of the same dipole I've got now, just a G5RV, plus I had a vertical as well, which multi-band vertical I'd inherited from some deceased ham. And picking between one or the other, I managed to do quite well, but I think so much of it was due to this terrific propagation that we seem to have for a few years, and it seemed to vanish after a couple of years and hardly came back until now. Things are looking a bit better, certainly, but, for all those years, I don't think there was ever anything to rival it. Did I have any other comments? Oh, that little device that you've been working on there, Dave, is it well, tell me, I'm not quite sure what we're talking about. Is it a tiny little matching arrangement for this end-fed antenna? It sounds very tiny. Is it intended for transmitting as well as receiving? Just give me an idea what it's about. Sounds good. Sounds interesting. Oh, the only other comment I had too was about that weight loss tablet that was had the unfortunate name, Chris. It was pretty prescient when you think of it. I mean, the next version of AIDS was an equally effective weight loss program as well, so maybe they knew something. VK3AML in the group, VK3BLX.
Well, that's approximately what killed it. The first AIDS clinics actually objected to the name and suggested they change it. The directors of the company, I looked it up, apparently said, we've had that name for 30 years, you changed the name of the disease. And of course the disease won. Within 6 or 7 years the company was out of business. People took it as a very sick joke. But that TV ad, I think, was from 1978, which is predating the whole AIDS epidemic, and therefore they were walking into a trap that they weren't aware was there. And I too will be interested to hear what the tuning device Dave is talking about consists of. 49-1, did he say? I'm not quite sure. Anyway, I'll hand it back to Peter. And Port Elizabeth, you might tell me where that is. My Port Elizabeth, I really should know. West Indies? I'm not sure. Somewhere in the Caribbean? VK3ACZ and group, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ. No, on the South Africa, on the a bit lower down than East London, and what would it be, halfway? No, not even halfway. It's a lot closer to East London than Cape Town. But for some reason it's changed its name to, let's see, one of the maps still has the old, the map I'm looking at still has the old name. Not to worry, it has got I think it's a name that starts with G and the next letter is N or something like that. Anyway, just quickly, John, classic, I thought that about the weight loss with the alternate product, but didn't dare say it. Aye. Yeah, with the NFEDs, Chris, I think you'll find you don't really need a tuner if you get the length close to right. If it's on the resonant half wave or quarter wave or whatever, my 20 metre antenna is terrific on 20 metres and 40 metres. Quarter wave with 40. It's supposed to be 15's supposed to be some sort of resonant length as well, but it doesn't seem to say that on mine. Or one of the books I've got says that if it's resonant at 40, it'll work on 15. Not my experience, but anyway. A quick few things I jotted down, Chris. Club meeting on Monday for Sherbrooke Community Radio Club, if you're available. One of the interesting things about pulsars was that was listening to an astronomer talk one time about the various frequencies, or listening to the sounds they make on various frequencies, and one of them they pick up as 430 megahertz. And I thought, oh, how cute that they're listening to that tap, 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 or whatever it is, or beep, beep, beep at frequencies that we're rather familiar with. Dave, Derbyshire, I stand corrected. You will, after all, you will know. I won't. I was thinking that it would depend on what university you went to, Oxbridge or Camesford, hi. But yes, I do stand corrected. Oh, and just one thing, Dave, too, about this lady that I'm part-time carer for. This poor lady can't take a trick. She's a 57-year-old. She's visually impaired, diabetic retinopathy, of course. The most poorly controlled diabetic I've ever seen. She can actually be 2.9 and asymptomatic. Not for long, mind you. She soon lets you know, but I had to break into her house one time because she was talking Braille and off with the fairies, and I thought, oh, no problem. I took a finger prick expecting to see a low sugar, and no, it was a sugar way over the top. And when I got her to the Angeles Hospital on Ferntree Gully, her blood sugar was so high they couldn't measure it, so that was a worry. And the poor lady, she's got PSC, heart disease, she's got the loss, she's got pre-gangrenous toes and all that, with ulcers that won't heal on her toes. So, interesting time, and she just fell over, got a phone call mid-afternoon to say, don't bother coming around, she's in Box Hill Hospital because she fractured the other knob. Some people, it's just one disaster after another. But anyway, sorry for going on about that, guys. The propagation, John, just quickly, 20 is absolutely stunning, but 15, funny enough, around about Christmas time, it was staying open until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning with Europe. It doesn't seem to be doing that much now. All I seem to hear on 15 is JAs, but not to say that it isn't brilliant. I guess when 10 is working so well, you tend to spend a lot of time listening in and trying to communicate on 10. It's just marvellous the way 10's going from sunrise, the stateside are coming in, and by early afternoon that's faded away, and Europe is coming in right up until sunset. But anyway, this is the Wallace Institute had a thing a few weeks ago that said that the solar figures are the best they've been in 7 years, or the conditions have been, and way ahead of predictions, and it's looking like being a great cycle 25, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Back to you, Chris. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
Do we have anybody else joining us? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, standing by. And just pardon me a moment, I'll answer the phone. Hello? Not easily. Oh, okay. Okay, I'll be up there. Okay, thanks. That was my wife ringing from the bedroom. So I will have to dash up there very quickly and help her. She's actually dropped the remote controls for the TV under the bed, and she's had her moon boot removed so she can't actually put her foot on the floor. It would damage the healing process. So Dave, if you could take it and just talk to Peter and John for a minute or two. I'll leave the live stream running and streaming. And I'll be back in about 60 seconds, if that's okay by you. VK3CG, so don't say anything aimed at me for the next 60 seconds, please. VK3CG and group, VK3AML.
Yeah, from VK3ECG. Yes, that's fine there, Chris. I'm just watching on the YouTube, and but at the moment, with a delay, you're just answering the phone. Yes, no, I mean, this little 49 to 1 I'm using is it's just a tiny toroid. It would only be, I suppose, again, just over a centimetre across. But winding was fairly straightforward. I actually don't mind winding toroids. People get very twitchy about them, but I don't have any problems with winding them. Soldering it, however, onto this board, and then the rest of it was quite complicated. But effectively, it means you've got what looks like a BNC male plug, and you basically using it's really a board-mounted BNC plug, and effectively you build the balun on the back of it. So it's not much larger than an ordinary standard BNC. If you imagine a BNC to PL259 sort of socket adapter, the whole of the matching unit is basically the same size as that with the plug. So I think it's made by K6ARK, and what happened was I had ordered some stuff from Amazon and it never came, and so I sent my sort of thing in, and they agreed it had never been tracked to my address, so they refunded me the money. And I was sitting there with this refund thing in there, and I thought, I wouldn't mind trying to build one of these things, because it's very light, and you can just sort of literally I don't know how much it will weigh with the wire, but not very much. So the sort of thing you could easily tuck into the back of a rucksack and just run it off the rig directly. Might need a bit of a counterpoise somewhere, I suppose, but. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's as Peter was saying, you've got a fixed. If you run it as an end-fed half wave on a particular frequency like 40, yes, it should actually do 15 as well. But I think it depends a little bit on your construction and so on. But you can actually put a small coil in the antenna and as a small loading coil, and with that you can probably get 10, 15 and 20 as well on a 40 on a wire designed for 40, say, I don't know, 60 feet or whatever it is, and theoretically that should be okay without an antenna tuner. It's the 9-to-1s with the random wires that need the antenna tuner. So it'll be just fun to see how this thing works. If it works, I'll let you know. There's been a few videos of them on YouTube, but it's good, frustratingly complex things to actually put together. But seems to have worked, and I've wrapped a whole load of heat shrink on it, so it shouldn't move around, or it should be pretty stable. What was the other thing I was looking at? Oh yes, the other thing was, oh yes, the advertisement for the AIDS. That was interesting, because I looked that up because I was trying to remember, because I do vaguely remember the that story, but I think originally it was benzocaine, and benzocaine is a local anaesthetic sort of stuff that they used to have in sort of original Bongellas and things like that as a mucosal anaesthetic, and it's quite effective actually. But and you could use it in other forms as well. But it's basically a mucosal surface thing, and then it was changed over to one of the synthetic or substitute amphetamines. So this was, of course, basically increasing your metabolic rate. So you burn up the food more. Unfortunately, it has a few slightly awkward side effects, that it used to cause people to have strokes, because of course it put their blood pressure up significantly. So there's a lot of these things would not be allowed anyway today if it hadn't had its marketing completely wrecked by the virus. It would not have survived in any event, because it would be effectively an illegal drug place. Anyway, I see you're back there, Chris. So back to you, VK3AML and the group VK3ECG.
VK3ECG and group VK3AML. I got the latter half of your contact there, Dave, talking about the AIDS candy, AYDS, and it being related to benzocaine. It's always intrigued me that dentists for local anaesthesia, I think they still do use oil of cloves, of all things. Does that mean that cloves in quantity are harmful? And one thing I heard about cloves was that if they made cigarettes out of them, they make cigarettes out of cloves in Indonesia. I forget the brand, but apparently the cloves have an effect on the lungs of killing any nerve pain that might be caused by the smoking action, and thereby allow the smoker to smoke more without any discomfort. And for that reason, I think the Surgeon General in America has banned them from import to America. And a couple of, how could I put it, friends of mine who are devotees of smoking, the few that are still alive, tell me that cloves taste very nice, very mild. So I'm just wondering about the anaesthesia effects of that particular means of taking cloves via the lungs. You might know something about it, Dave, with your forensic background and your chemical background. And did you have to do a chemical engineering at some stage with all of that? I'd be curious next time round, Dave. Round to John, if you're still there, John, VK3BLX and group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group VK3BLX. Yeah, okay. Oh, interesting, Dave, on the little toroid arrangement. I guess it's, pardon me. I guess it's good for a few watts. It sounds like it's intended for use with a portable rig, so I guess it's intended for just 5 or 10 watts or something if it's that small. But certainly sounds very compact. Does it sort of go straight on the antenna terminal of the radio, or sounds like it might be intended for that? What else was I going to talk about? Oil of cloves was a little bottle that we used to have for applying a drop to an aching tooth if you had a cavity that was exposed prior to getting to the dentist. You'd pull out the oil of cloves and stick it on the tooth, and that usually kept it quiet for a while. And the other comment I had, Peter, you're talking about the lady that you're helping care for, the diabetic, that sort of reminded me very much about my sister. Excuse me. My sister was diabetic, and she, oddly enough, didn't have any trouble with obesity or anything. She was quite skinny. But she had, I think, probably even worse controlled diabetes than the lady that you were talking about. She could get down to a figure of about 1.0 and still be lucid, although she could be getting a bit stroppy and not 100% as sensible as you would hope at a level like that, and sometimes high. I can't remember what the high numbers were that she hit, but only a few times did she ever collapse under these crazy conditions. Funnily enough, in the early days when she was on pig insulin, everything was quite well controlled, and her control of her diabetes really went to pot when they changed over to sort of human insulin-based insulin, and didn't work for her as well. Ultimately, I don't know whether it was due to the diabetes or something else, but she had a fall and broke her head of femur. So that put her into hospital, and she never went back to her home. She finished up after her recuperation, which went pretty well, actually. She recovered from the operation quite well. She went into care. But one thing, another, she had a couple of illnesses there, and finished up in Box Hill Hospital for a while, came back from there with a terrible bed sore, which was a point of contention. And although she sort of struggled on and off for various things for a while, she eventually succumbed in a few months. So I don't think we necessarily put that down to the fractured femur, but it didn't help, I suppose. Set her on a path. So, things can go from one thing to another, but her diabetes, by gosh, it was all over the place. It was incredible. Okay, back to you, Chris. VK3AML, the group VK3BLX.
Yes, sad story with diabetes. It does limit your movement quite a bit. Limits your ability to do things that you would never have thought about previously in terms of food intake too. I have quite a few friends my own age who are suffering from it. Most of them that have it have some problem with obesity as well. Now, just slightly off that subject, somebody asked our VK3 Pirate what's wrong with Prue and her moon boot. Miss VK Pirate is asking. That, I presume, your partner, VK3 Pirate, whoever you might be. Situation is my wife has a condition called skeletal hypertrophy. That's the opposite of osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a loss of bone density with age. Skeletal hypertrophy is the predilection to bone spurs, to the growth of excess calcium from the bones. And the result of that has been that Prue's spine is largely immobile. She can't turn. She has to move her whole upper body right and left. That's not the real problem. The real problem has been that the spurs have caused a compression, had caused, past tense, a compression of the spinal cord in the lumbar spine, lower part of the back, which was gradually causing her to lose the control, the usage of her legs, getting weaker and weaker. So she had an operation, a complex one, a long one, 6 hours, at Box Hill Hospital on the 28th of February. And they installed a plate between two of the vertebrae to spread them apart to allow the compression of the spine to reduce, and did a bone graft, scraps of bone ground off other parts of the vertebrae in a particular spot that would immobilise that part of the spine so that the condition would not recur. It's complicated, I can't describe it all. The result of that was incredible success. Full usage and feeling in the legs and feet returned. But unfortunately, for a couple of years as a result of the previous pressure on the spine, she was not used to controlling her legs, her feet. And so as soon as she was allowed out of hospital to go on a treadmill and do exercises, she did the exercises, but being unused to walking again, overdid it and managed to snap a tendon in the leg near the Achilles tendon. So that's the reason for the moon boot. And if anything, that has been more debilitating in terms of movement than the spinal problem ever was. But we're relieved that this is a short-term problem. The spinal term would have been long-term, like wheelchair bound for the rest of your life. So we're thankful, but it does put reliance on me for fitting a moon boot every time she has to get up from bed, every morning, every evening. And I have to do the shopping, a lot of the cooking, cleaning. So it makes my escape from home for more than a few hours difficult. I may be able to get away on Monday night for the meeting of the Sherbrooke Radio Club. I'd like to. And I threaten Peter that I may take an extract of the 15-minute interview I did with you at our undisclosed location in Belgrave Heights because I think it's a very good interview, and I think you came over extremely well. VK3ACZ and the group VK3AML.
VK3AML and the group VK3ACZ. Yeah, I wish that was my perception about the interview, but hey, we certainly had fun. We definitely did, and I got a buzz from watching you work that Italian station. And remember, it was something like 24,500 kilometres on the long path. Yeah, all good fun. That'll be good if you can come along, and I understand completely, and you're to be congratulated for your dedication and devotion to Prue. No doubt at all that if the... No, I was going to say the boot was on the other foot, but that's a bad pun if we're considering moon boots. No, if the roles were reversed, I know she would take good care of you, so it's great to see couples working the way we're supposed to, and all good there. Now... Goodness me, not at my best tonight. I keep thinking of things I'm going to mention, and then they slip past me. Oh, yes, that phone call that Prue made to you, that I sort of chuckled in a way, because I was thinking, have you ever noticed how teenagers will text each other when they're in the same room? Well, Prue gets to ring you from from somewhere down the hallway or whatever it is, or from the next room. Sorry, it just tickled my fancy.
Other end of the house.
Back to you before I say something even sillier, Chris. VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
Well, the situation is Prue's at the front of the house, I'm at the back of the house, and the easiest way for her to get me is I'm on the landline here, and she has the mobile phone by the bed, so she picks up, if she really needs me, and that occasion that was a bit of an emergency, she picks up the mobile phone, dials the home number, and I answer that. So that's the situation. I really ought to install an intercom, but for the time that she'll be, confined to bed that way, it probably wouldn't be worthwhile, and it costs all of about 5 cents on our plan to ring on the mobile phone, I think. Yeah, Dave, I'll try and get along on Monday anyway. I always find the group good value. I was, before finding that Griebland documentary, going to run a couple of short pieces by Jim VK3AMN. I obtained permission from him to run them, of the trip to Wuroo, WHROO, almost 150 kilometres directly north of Melbourne, in what's now a ghost town. There are very many more people in the graveyard than there are in the locality. It was a mining town, one of the first mining towns to be photographed in 1858, and the photos survive in the State Library of Victoria. So I put together a little bit with 2 clips that Jim had taken at the diggings and the graveyard, and I combined them with the State Library photographs and enlargements. But I'll leave that for next week. I think it's better that I group together all of that stuff of field trips. I've got more of my own field trip to Flinders Island to run next week as well, and it more tones in with that material. But round to Dave, the thing of oil of cloves, have they ever tried to ban cloves? And also the query about did you have to go through some sort of chemical engineering training to know what you do about the chemistry of forensics? VK3CG and group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and group VK3CG. No, not really. In terms of chemistry, so obviously chemistry was actually considered sort of more important as a school subject to do my sort of stuff with than even biology and things were. But certainly, the sort of the general sort of biochemistry, and then certainly in the forensic side, it's nearly mostly toxicology, and there are specialist toxicologists, so we tend to get involved more in the sort of pharmacology of it, if you like, rather than the sort of chemical analysis and that sort of side of things. I mean, there are some fascinating, stories, and there's the Shulgin, the chemist who wrote that wonderful book, is it PIHKAL, phenylethylamines I have known and loved. And then I think he produced a second book after that, which was TIHKAL, which was tryptamines that I have known and loved. And he basically sort of he and his wife tell the story of their own lives, and then go through all the different sort of chemicals that they've tried on themselves, describing their effects. And these, I think he's the MDMA and the ecstasy and that sort of stuff. I think some of his original descriptions of that are probably sort of some of the best things in literature, although he was an unusual chemist, to say the least, would be the way of describing him, I expect. Oil of Clothes is fascinating. I always think of the film with Dustin Hoffman, Marathon Man, every time I think of Oil of Cloves, because of course that's the movie where Sir Laurence Olivier is torturing him with a dental drill. It doesn't bear thinking about, really. And he has this little bottle of Oil of Clothes that he says as soon as he tells him, is it somewhere where the diamonds are or whatever it is, he's going to give him the Oil of Clothes to take away the pain. And the dentists still use it. It's certainly used, I think, a lot for root canal stuff. And you're absolutely right, John. That's exactly. It's still available, and people can still use it, and so on. It is, I think, toxic in if you ingest large amounts of it, and so on. But I think otherwise it's still fairly available. I think you can still get hold of it, and it certainly works. I do remember the stuff about the Carter's liver pills, but I don't know much about them. So. But on back to some of the science stuff. I really I hadn't heard about. I knew about masers, but really fascinating. I mean, you've got the laser and the maser and so on, and the ruby masers, and they transform that early microwave work, and I suppose led to a lot of those fascinating developments. I remember those horn antennas, seeing pictures of those. They were quite extraordinary. I'm not quite sure what I mean, obviously it was like almost partly a sort of a waveguide effect, and I just wondered how they were saying it helped to remove the static, or presumably they were referring to just general background noise, but I'm not quite sure what those horn antennas were doing in that respect. But fascinating things, and look very odd when they move, if I remember. Anyway, back to you, Chris. VK3AML, the group VK3CG.
VK3CG and the group VK3AML. And when I was a kid, the horn antennas, this is the early 60s, when I first became aware of them as a kid, they were used much more frequently than they were later on. I mean, by the late 1970s, I think parabolic dish antennas had become almost universal in UHF, SHF microwave work. But the Surrey Hills Communications Tower, corner of Harding Street and Canterbury Road, had a couple of really big horn antennas on top when it was first constructed, I think in 1962. And I don't quite know why they went out of fashion. It could be that you could construct a dish antenna out of mesh, but the horn antenna has to be solid sheet metal, and that probably would have a lot more wind resistance. It would require a stronger support structure than would a dish of equivalent gain. I don't know. That's something I'll have to look into. Maybe if I can find a documentary on that sort of thing, or make some commentary on it next week. Look it up. I'll just make a note. Horn antennas. Check. Interesting. Maybe you might know something about them, John. VK3BLX and the group VK3AML.
VK3AML and the group VK3BLX. No, I'm afraid I can't add to your knowledge on horn antennas at all. But I have a funny feeling that I do remember the horn antennas on the Surrey Hills Tower. I've just got this sort of image in my head, so I'm presuming they were big enough to be clearly visible from the ground, and they've got a distinctive shape, and I'm pretty sure I remember a couple sitting up high there somewhere. I thought it was interesting in that article on the Echo, metallised balloon, satellite, where they had the maser operating for amplification of the received signal. The received signal must have been absolutely tiny, you would think. I mean, it was a 10-storey building high, and I suppose radar at the time would be able to detect that at 100 miles or whatever it was. What was the altitude? Is it 100 or was it higher? At any rate, the signal that you'd need to receive back for a successful phone operation with the available technology then, I would have thought would have been, would have been significant. So I guess that's where the maser came into its own. They were able to get sufficient low noise gain to be able to extract whatever audio modulation they were putting onto it. I guess it was pretty much straight analog in those days, 1960. So, pretty amazing, really. All right, look, I don't have anything terribly much else, so back to you, Chris. VK3AML and the group VK3BLX.
VK3BLX and group VK3AML. I think you could see from the horn antennas and the dish antennas that they had access to, particularly at the Californian end. They would have had a hell of a lot of antenna gain, presuming they were up somewhere between 400 megs and a gig. So they would have been hitting that reflective surface very hard. And many years ago, gosh, I would have been... It was the New Year's Day of 1974, I think. Either 73 or 74. I and the late Dan Van Elken 3UI and the late Tony Sanderson 3AML, God, they're all late now, all went down to a ham in Geelong, the southern parts of Geelong, up high on a hill. John Wilkinson was his name. They have a VHF UHF award for him. He died fairly young. He died only 3 or 4 years after that. But he was the first ham I ever saw who had a 12-foot dish in his backyard pointing directly south. Somebody on the other side of Bass Strait could communicate with him via sporadic adiabatic conditions, ducting. But he had also communicated via the moon, or at least received, I think, only via the moon, Navy tests of moon bounce with sideband, and he played the tape to us. It was a cassette tape, and it was a voice that sounded like fast flutter fade. I don't know quite what caused that, but it was sideband, and it was on 400 megs or higher. And that would have been 50 years ago when I think about it, gosh. But Ron Wilkinson, was receiving very low noise FETs from the US Navy as a gratis thing in return for assistance with their tests. At the time, 1972, 3, 4. It was early 70s anyway. I was about 18. And I remember 3UI and 3AML, the old 3AML, were particularly interested to see what was going on there. I was quite overwhelmed by it. I'd never seen anything above 2 metres at that stage. It was rare for people to be on 400 megs in 1972. Anyway, yeah, they could do moon bounce with voice, but God knows how many kilowatts the Navy was using from the American end for it to be heard out here. And God knows how much gain. They probably had access to Goldstone's biggest dish. And the station from Normandy, I gather, was speaking to you in English, Peter. And antimony pills, actually. Interesting. And as far as English pronunciation, it never ceases to amaze me, the number of English words that are pronounced totally differently to the way they look on paper. Like there's surname, an English surname, which to read it would be Cholmondeley, Cholmondely, Cholmondeley, and apparently it's pronounced Chumley, which reminds me of hyacinth bouquet, not bucket bouquet. The monster, VK3ECG and the group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3ECG, turning gears. Yeah, absolutely right. Yes, Chumley. It's one of the better ones. And there's a few out there as well. I'm trying to think. Gilbert and Sullivan took a few of them off as well, actually. So, particularly the saints. So St. John is St. John. So that politician, I think, was St. John Stevens, just St. John Stevens. And then I think it's in the Sorcerer, Gilbert and Sullivan. There's the song about Cimmeriax, and Cimmeriax is St. Mary's Axe, which is a street. And so there's quite a few of those sort of weird condensation words to say nothing of things like Worcestershire and things like that. Cause a lot of trouble, particularly for people from the United States, where quite sensibly the English spelling and English pronunciation is indeed crazy, and that's perfectly there's a whole series of them. You can go on forever on them, but some of them are very, very bizarre indeed. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly very interesting to see some of the photographs of the old gold town. That would be really interesting, having a look at those things. And as I said, I don't really know much more about those antennas, and but I can sort of see how they work. But yes, they would be very unwieldy, and there's a certain lack of symmetry about them, which would have made the engineering probably more problematic in terms of, mounting them and actually steering them and so on, which I suppose would be somewhat easier with a dish and so on. But I don't know. I've got an awful lot more here. As I said, I had a couple of other sort of slight comments, but I think you've answered most of them, Chris, which is fascinating. Oh yes, so I had a comment about the safety in the factories. Yes, absolutely dreadful, and who knows what those chemicals were, all the dusts that were flying around and so on. I suspect those sort of belt systems for rotary power and so on would have been extraordinarily dangerous for people getting caught up in them. A lot of, no real signs of effective safety clothing or safety rules around those sorts of things. And I must say things like, clothing and hair stuff always scares me in these places with machinery. And but these days, of course, the guard systems are so elaborate with some of the safety mechanisms. Not that the things don't happen; they do, but far less frequently than before. In fact, going around some of the sort of historic reconstruction of gold towns and things like that, Sovereign Hill and the like, some of the safety things are extraordinary, and when they do some reenactment, they have to take enormous precautions, and rightly so. But obviously, those were the hazards that went with the job. And of course, mining itself is probably one of the riskiest jobs, not only from the point of view of actual physical injuries, but the various dusts and dust-related diseases and things like that, and very, 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 very nasty stuff. Anyway, Chris, back to you. VK3AML and the group VK3ECG.
Do we have any other people that would like to join the group? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, just seeing if anyone's around. Too late, I expect. It's 12:18. I noticed John has said that he'd depart. I might just leave it open for him to make final comments after I say what I have to say. Mining. Silicosis was the outstanding one. And I believe that even in ancient Egyptian mummies, they've detected lung damage from the inhalation of sand. Of course, there would have been sand storms in ancient Egypt commonly, and if you breathe that stuff long enough, your lungs start to turn to stone, as I understand it. With Jim 3AMN's coverage of Wuru, it was a gold mining area, and there are big round tanks still detectable on the ground from the turn of last century, which, according to Jim, were cyanide tanks for the extraction of the gold. And cyanide, so far as I know, is a chemical that doesn't break down. It should still be there. So I imagine that those tanks are a potential toxicology risk. And I know from my experience doing some research in Queensland that the turn of the century sheep dips used to use arsenic, and wash the sheep in arsenic to get the bugs out of the wool. And arsenic, of course, being an element, doesn't break down either. It is there to be toxic for ages. And old sheep dip sites, both in Victoria and in Queensland, are considered extremely hazardous. It's amazing what our grandparents managed to survive when you think of it. What with smoking being acceptable and no occupational health and safety. I might have some qualms about unions, but we have gone ahead a long way with safety. Perhaps in some ways it's to a ridiculous extent, but in general, the health and welfare of workers has been looked after. VK3BLX, if you're there, John, just for a final. I'll try to wind this up about 12:30, if you don't mind. VK3BLX, are you still around, John? VK3AML.
Yes, VK3AML and the group VK3BLX. Yep, still here, but probably about to head off. Nothing much to add other than to thank you for another remarkable program, test transmission. The amount of stuff that you managed to unearth and the quality of it and the interest level of it is fantastic. And while I don't manage to get here every Saturday night, when I do, I invariably enjoy it, and also enjoy the rag chew with the rest of the guys. So, congratulations on another great night, and cheers to everyone there. VK3AML and the group VK3BLX is signing off. Thank you.
Thanks for the compliments, John. It's appreciated. And as for the films, it's amazing what's hidden away in odd corners of the internet that very few people get to see, like the Internet Archive, as distinct from the resource of YouTube. There's even a Russian site that I'm not supposed to know about. Doesn't turn up on Google. Google has banned it because it has so much pirated stuff on it. OK.ru, the Russian equivalent of YouTube, on which literally tens of thousands of feature films are on there that you can look at and download. I always check it for documentary material, but there's not that much documentary material there that isn't with a Russian commentary. That's the problem with the international aspect of YouTube. Quite often you can find the film on a subject of your interest. You play it and it turns out to be the narration in Spanish or in Portuguese or in any number of languages that you have no understanding of. I even found one documentary which I was very interested to put on. It was a thing on the history of broadcasting, but the narration was in Arabic, which I didn't think it'd be very, very much use here. Oh dear. And that's an imponderable. The things that I look for in stuff that I can run here is, number one, of course, interest value to the ham radio community, which largely we are. So tendency to emphasise electronics, science, communication, even borderline areas of electronics like remote control or all of that sort of stuff. Number 2, is it above 480p? If you try to stream stuff that's in 240p or 320, it looks pretty awful in this 1080 format. And number 3, is the soundtrack sufficiently undistorted that you can correct it with audio editing to a point where it's at least understandable. And with many of the transfers that are, particularly on the military site, surprisingly, the American military site, the soundtracks are next to unintelligible. I don't know what they've done with the films, whether they've had meatheads running them through projectors to the point where they put another row of sprocket holes through the soundtrack, but it certainly sounds that way. So all told, I go through a lot more than I ever show, and there is a lot more on internet than you could ever imagine. I mean, internet's been going now for 30 years, and people have been uploading films from all sorts of sources. And there were a hell of a lot of instructional films on 16mm at the end of the usefulness of that gauge as a teaching medium when videotape came in. And many of them still have interest value, though very few people get to see them. We had in the Central School, Form 1 and Form 2 that I went to in 1966 and 67, we had a particularly forward-looking teacher named Mr. Walsh. He was nominally a geography teacher, but he was very good on arranging sessions for the kids with a 16mm projector in the biggest room of the school, room 10, with a big screen at the other end of the room. And his sessions became so popular that they set aside 90 minutes each week for the entire school to come along and look at the films. It gave the other teachers a bit of a rest, and it gave us a source of interest. And I saw documentary films predominantly from the State Film Centre in Treasury Place in those days, big educational film library there, that I haven't seen since and I would love to see again. Early films of the Antarctic research, 1948, when they set up the station on Heard Island, for example, I saw at that stage. And at that time, 1966-67, none of us were used to seeing instructional documentaries on a screen in colour. Television was strictly black and white, so that was it was always wonderful to see these films in colour. There was one early Australian documentary film on Albert Namatjira, the painter. I believe it was one of the first documentaries made by Film Australia, or it was then called the Commonwealth Film Unit, in colour. Haven't seen it since. Saw it in 67, thought it was a wonderful doco. And that sort of a film did a lot to break down racial prejudice against Aboriginals with the younger rising generation who were around at the time of the famous 1967 referendum. Sorry, I'm rambling. I'll hand it back to Peter. But there is a lot more film resource on the internet that I can certainly dip into, even when I can't get out to shoot any film. I'm tempted, Peter, to bring a video camera to the Sherbrooke Radio Club on Monday and interview Jim directly, get a bit of his slant on film or the various things he does in the outback, for example, so I can run that on a Saturday night. Perhaps I should forewarn him. VK3ACZ and group, VK3AML.
VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ. That sounds like a terrific idea, Chris. I've had quite a few campfire chats with dear old Jim now, and he's a goldmine of information. You'd turn up some very interesting and worthwhile stuff, so let me encourage you there. And just final comments now, because you said you wanted to be out of the shack soon. Tortured with a dental drill, hey? I won't be watching The Marathon Man, Dave. I don't think it's one of the films I've seen. I'd remember that. Had root canal treatment just the once, and as a dentist explained to me, normally they're digging into a dead nerve. Mine was just a cracked tooth, and the nerve was 100% intact, and I think there would be fingernail marks on the roof of the dentist surgery from that effort. That was legalised torture, that's for sure. And another thing to Dave too, I want to encourage you with that getting out with your 705 and working 10 watts. Don't feel you're undergunned at all. because, as I said, this station in Derbyshire was actually, I gave him 5.9 on 2 of the 3 occasions. I think it was a 5.6 the other time, looking at my log, but he's still great signal out of the middle of England there. So, yeah, the sky's the limit when the band conditions are this good. Last thing, Chris, the Surrey Hills Tower. Remember going past as a kid and seeing it, and it seemed to be completely covered in microwave dishes and whatever else. Drove past it on Canterbury Road not so long ago, and apart from a few of the obvious telecom or Telstra mobile phone antennas, it doesn't seem to be much on it. I'm just wondering what that tower actually did and or still does. I'll put it back to you for the answer to that, and say my 7-3 to everybody. And I can only nod my head when you're talking about and smile when you talk about the effort involved in tracking down the stuff on the internet, and we're the beneficiaries of it every Saturday night. And thank you so much. VK3AML in the group VK3ACZ. Cheers all. Good night.
Yeah, good night, Pete. We'll probably see you Monday evening. The main concern also is to find material that's not under copyright, so you avoid commercial documentaries or material from people who might be touchy about the usage of their material. Sometimes you have to guess, make an educated guess. Only one occasion has somebody complained about me using material without permission. And it wasn't really a complaint, it was just a request to get in touch with him by email. And the trouble is that the amount of time I have available, particularly with Prue on my hands, to attend to clearing permission for everything is somewhat limited, and emails plus waiting for a response involve quite a bit of time. The horn antennas. Surrey Hills Tower, as I understand it, originally the intent of Telecom was to set up a chain of microwave relays. Part of it was to set up a chain of microwave relays from the Melbourne television stations to Sydney, with that as the first hop. I think that was it. And at that time they had a horn antenna on. I think that was associated with the television relaying. But very quickly after that, they added a lot of links between telephone exchanges going there, bulk broadband links. But as time has gone on, and as they've gone up in frequency for more band space, the requisite diameter of the parabolic dishes has reduced and reduced. In the same way, the quietness of front ends at room temperature has got better and better over the last 50, 60 years since that tower has been built, so that the antennas on there don't have to be so much intercepting the wind and causing wind load on the tower, nor do they have to be big. And I suppose eventually they'll be able to get rid of the tower, though I spoke to somebody within the department, within Telstra, about that tower, and he said it's very unlikely we'll be taking it down. He said because the prospect of getting a thing in such a strategic high point approved by council and approved by all the green groups now is like 1% of what it would have been 60 years ago. So we have to be very careful in closing down hilltop sites, because we'll never get them back. And I can kind of see his point. VK3CG, I guess, for a final now. It's just past midnight, so we've better start winding up. But thank you, all of you, John, Dave, Peter, for all coming on. Even the pirate, who presumably is listening, and the people on the stream. I always appreciate... I'm not like a young teenager who works on the numbers involved with looking at my YouTube clips, but I do understand that if there's nobody watching, there's no point in doing it. VK3ECG and group, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML, VK3ECG. Yes, absolutely. But it's certainly worthwhile, and these test transmissions are fabulous, and certainly I think the things that get me are sort of the eclectic selection, which just raises and takes me to things that I probably wouldn't look at and wouldn't even know existed. So from that point of view, it's always an absolute education, and thank you very much. And also your commentaries around it, both some of them during and some in between them, based on obviously your research that's brought you to the particular film and images are as valuable, if not more valuable, because they actually enlighten on so many of those topics that in zones and spaces that certainly I'm not necessarily particularly familiar with, or I've come across once but haven't followed up, or something like that. So thank you very much, Chris. It's a real education to take part and to absorb this material. It's really fascinating stuff. Well, look, 7:30 everyone, and I shall get some sleep as well, and have a pleasant week ahead, everybody. And let's hope crews are well on the way to recovery, and with your ongoing care, I'm sure that will be the case. 7:30 everyone, VK3 ECG now from clear.
Okay, all the best, Dave. Thanks for popping up. Thank you, John. And Peter, do you want to say anything just to tie the ribbons?
Was that me?
Yes, Peter, unless you've changed your name.
No, sorry. No, I just 7-3 everybody, and already looking forward to next week. I hope to see you at the meeting Monday. I'll be right to drive you home if required. If Volker's not there, and until then, cheers all, and good night.
No worries, and no doubt Prue will be on the home phone contacting me if anything goes wrong, and I'll have the mobile. So thanks for that, and see you Monday, I hope. It depends on what condition Prue's in at the time, and whether anything bad's gone on, or whether we need to be here for doctors. We get locum visits occasionally too, as Prue's being checked on the recovery. So thank you, everybody. We'll catch you again next week at 9:30 p.m. Melbourne time. And thank you to the people on the text chat. NPI test. The horns were removed in 2008, according to the link you attempted to post to NPI test. Remaining 3 large parabolic dishes are not active. That's interesting. I used to, when I was living in Surrey Hills NPI test, I used to use the large parabolic dishes on the Surrey Hills Tower as a distant point to focus my modulated light transmissions. And on one occasion we actually bounced modulated light from there to the late Tony Sanderson's place, which was only a few hundred yards away, and we could actually talk back and forth on a modulated light beam reflected off that tower. Telecom Australia keeping you in touch, even if they don't know it. Only the cellular antennas plus a couple of commercial microwave links are still in use. Yeah, I think the building next to it, though, is a local telephone exchange, so obviously that can't be removed. And Paul 3HN, yes, I must listen more to your AM on 80 metres. It's a superb quality, Paul, so thanks for that. John Young, thank you for being there, and all the rest. So this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima concluding the test transmission QSO following on 147.475 and concluding the transmission on 140 and concluding the YouTube live stream. It's getting a bit late. All the best, people. See you next week. Okay, and final comments to the live stream folk. Nice to see people from interstate and overseas. Should Clint Turner, KA7OEI, ever see this, we must organise a Skype interview with you about your activities on software-defined transceivers, both in northern Utah and the KPH one at Point Reyes, north of, I think that's the one you're involved with in California, north of San Francisco. They're both superb low-noise sites with superb reception, and I use them regularly from here to listen into what's going on in America, particularly on 75 metres, God help me, with some of the CB-style chat that goes on there. So, Clint, I've checked my computer here, the main computer, which is quad-core, and it can cope with recording full screen grab off Skype with no problem. So we will get into that once you're clear of whatever obligations you and Brett have with cleaning up poor old Gordon K7HFE's estate. Very sad to see him go. So with no further ado, this is VK3AML wishing everybody a very good night.